Pierre Michel had recovered some of his assurance, but he was still extremely nervous. "I hope monsieur will not think that there has been any negligence on my part," he said anxiously, his eyes going from Poirot to M. Book. "It is a telltale thing that has happened. I hope monsieur does not think that it reflects on me in any way." Having the man's fears, Poirot began his questions. He first elicited Michel's name and address, his length of service, and the length of time he had been on this particular route. These particulars he already knew, but the routine questions served to put the man at his ease. "And now," went on Poirot, "let us come to the of last night. M. Ratchet retired to bed when?" "Almost immediately after dinner, monsieur." "Actually before we left Belgrade." "So he did on the previous night." "He had directed me to make up the while he was at dinner, and I did so." "Did anybody go into his compartment afterwards?" "His valet, monsieur, and the young American gentleman, his secretary." "Anyone else?" "No, monsieur, not that I know of." "Two, and that is the last you saw or heard of him?" "No, monsieur." "You forget he rang his bell about 22 after we had stopped." "What happened exactly?" "I knocked at the but he called out and said he had made a mistake." "In English or in French?" "In French. What were his words exactly?" "Cens rien. Je me suis trompé." "Quite right," said Poirot, "that is what I heard, and then you went away." "Yes, monsieur." "Did you go back to your seat?" "No, monsieur, I went first to answer another bell that had just rung." "Now, Michel, I am going to ask you an important question. Where were you at 1:15?" Monsieur. I was at my little seat at the end facing up the corridor." "You are sure?" "Mais oui, at least I went into the next coach, the Athens coach, to speak to my colleague there." "We 6k about the snow." "That was at some time after 1:00. "I cannot say exactly. And you returned when?" "One of my bells rang, monsieur. I remember I told you." "It was the American lady." "She had rung several times." "I recollect," said Poirot. "And after that?" "After that, monsieur, I answered your bell and brought you some mineral water. Then, about half an hour later, I made up the bed in one of the other compartments, that of the young American gentleman. Mr. Ratchet's secretary was Mr. McQueen alone in his compartment when you went to make up his. The English colonel from number 15 was with him. They had been sitting talking. What did the colonel do when he left Mr. McQueen?" "He went back to his own compartment, no 15. That is quite close to your seat, is it not?" "Yes, monsieur, it is the second compartment from that end of the corridor." "His bed was already made up?" "Yes, monsieur. I had made it up while he was at dinner." "What time was all this?" "I could not say exactly, monsieur. Not later than 2:00 certainly." "And after that?" "After that, monsieur, I sat in my seat till morning." "You did not go agam into the Athens coach?" "No, monsieur." "Perhaps you slept?" "I do not think so, monsieur. The train being at a standstill prevented me from dozing off as I usually do." "Did you see any of the passengers moving up or down the corridor?" The man reflected. "One of the ladies went to the toilet at the far end, I think." "Which lady?" "I do not know, monsieur. It was far down the corridor and she had her back to me." "She had on a kimono of scarlet dragons on it?" Poirot nodded. "And after that?" "Nothing, monsieur, until the moment underscore. You are sure?" "All, pardon you yourself, monsieur, opened your door and looked out for a second." "My friend," said Poirot, "I wondered whether you would remember that. By the way, I was awakened by what sounded like something heavy falling against my door." Have you any idea what that could hail been? The man stared at him. There was nothing, monsieur. Nothing, I am positive of it. Then I must have had the coquimar, said Poirot philosophically. Unless, put in M. Book, it was something in the compartment next door that you heard. Poirot took no notice of the suggestion. Perhaps he did not wish to. Before the wagon lit conductor let us pass to another point, he said. Supposing that last night an assassin joined the train, is it quite inane that he could not have left it after committing the crime? Pierre Michel his head. Nor that he can be concealed on it somewhere. It has been well searched, said M. Book abandon that idea, my friend. Besides, said Michel, no one could get onto the sleeping car without my seeing them. When was the last stop? What time was that? We should have left there at 11, but owing to the weather we were 20 minutes late. Someone might have come along from the ordinary part-off train. No, monsieur. After the service of dinner, the between the ordinary carriages and the sleeping cars is locked. Did you yourself descend from the train at Vinkovci? Yes, monsieur. I got down onto the platform as usual and stood by the step up into the train. The other conductors did the same. What, the forward door, the one near the restaurant car? It is always fastened on the inside. It is not so fastened now. The man looked surprised, then his face cleared. Doubtless one of the passengers ordered it to out on the snow. Probably, said Poirot. He tapped thoughtfully on the table for a minute or two. Monsieur does not blame me, said the man timidly. Poirot smiled on him kindly. You have had the evil chance, my friend, he said. Ah! One other while I remember it. You said that another bell rang just as you were knocking at M. Ratchet's door. In fact I heard it myself. Whose was it? It was the bell of Madame la Princesse Dragomirov. She desired me to summon her maid. And you did so? Yes, monsieur. Poirot studied the plan in front of him thoughtfully. Then he inclined his head. That is all, he said, for the moment. Thank you, monsieur. The man rose. He looked at M. Book. Do not distress yourself, said the latter kindly, negligence on your part. Gratified, Pierre Michel left the compartment. I cannot see that there has been any to the evidence of the secretary. For a minute or two Poirot remained lost in thought. I'll think, he said at last, that it would be well to affrit their word with Mr. McQueen in view of what we now know. The young American appeared promptly. Well, he said, how are things going? Not too badly. Since our last conversation, I have learned something. The identity of Mr. Ratchet. Hector McQueen leaned forward interestedly. Yes, he said. Ratchet, as you suspected, was merely an alias. The man Ratchet was Cassetti, who ran the celebrated kidnapping stunts, including the famous affair of little Daisy Armstrong. An expression of utter astonishment appeared on McQueen's face, then it darkened. The damned skunk, he exclaimed. You had no idea of this, Mr. McQueen? No, sir, said the young American decidedly. If I had, I'd cut off my right hand before it had a chance to do secretarial work for him. You feel strongly about the matter, Mr. McQueen. I have a particular reason for doing so. My father was the district attorney who handled the case, Mr. Poirot. I saw Mrs. Armstrong more than once. She was a lovely woman, so gentle and heartbroken. His face darkened. If ever a man deserved what he got, Ratchet or Cassetti is the man. I'm rejoiced at his end. Such a man wasn't fit to live. You almost feel as though you would have been willing to do the go-od deed yourself. I do. 1-2. He paused, then added rather guiltily, seems I'm kind of incriminating myself. I should be more inclined to suspect you, Mr. McQueen, if you displayed an inordinate sorrow at your employer's decease. I don't think I could do that even to save myself from the chair, said McQueen grimly. Then he added, if I'm not being unduly curious, just how did you figure this out? Cassetti's identity, I mean. By a fragment of a letter found in his compartment. But surely I mean that was rather careless of the old man. That depends, said Poirot, on the point of view. The young man seemed to find this remark rather baffling. He stared at Poirot as though trying to make him out. The task before me, said Poirot, is to make sure of the magnificence of everyone on the train. No offense need be taken, you understand. It is only a matter of routine. Sure. Get right on it and let me clear my character if I can. I'll need hardly ask you the number of your compartment, said Poirot, smiling, since I shared it with you for a night. It is the second-class compartment NOS 6 and 7, and after my departure you had it to yourself. That's right. Now, Mr. McQueen, I want you to describe your movements last night from the time of leaving the dining car. That's quite easy. I went back to my compartment, read a bit, got out on the platform at Belgrade, decided it was too cold, and got in Agime. I talked for a while to a young English lady who is in the compartment next to mine. Then I fell into conversation with that Englishman, Colonel Arbuthnot. As a matter of fact, I think you passed us as we were talking. Then I went into Mr. Ratchet and, as I told you, took down some memoranda of letters he invented Titten I said tied to him and left him. Colonel Arbuthnot was still standing in the corridor. His compartment was already made up for the night, so I suggested that he should come along to mine. I ordered a couple of drinks and we got right down to it, discussed world politics and the government of India and our own troubles with prohibition and the Wall Street crisis. I don't as a rule cotton to a stiff-necked lot, but I liked this one. Do you know what time it was when he left you? Pretty late. Nearly 12, I should say. You noticed that the train had stopped? Oh, yes. We wandered a bit out and saw the snow lying very thick, but we didn't think it was serious. What happened when Colonel Arbuthnot finally said night? He went along to his compartment and I called to the conductor to make up my bed. Where were you whilst he was making it? Standing just outside the door in the corridor smoking a cigarette. And then I went to bed and slept till morning. During the evening did you leave the train at all? Arbuthnot and I thought we'd get out at what was the name of the place, Vinkovci, to stretch our legs a bit. But it was bitterly cold, a blizzard on. We soon hopped back again. By which door did you the train? By the one nearest to our compartment, the one next to the dining car. Yes. Do you remember if it was bolted? McQueen considered. Why, yes, I seem to remember it was. At least there was a kind of bar that fitted across the handle. Is that what you mean? Yes. On getting back into the train did you replace that bar? Why, no, I don't think I did. I got in last. No, I don't seem to remember doing so. He added suddenly, is that an important? It may be. Now, I presume, monsieur, that while you and Colonel Arbuthnot were sitting talking the your compartment into the corridor was open. Hector McQueen, I want you, if you can, to tell me if anyone passed along that tighter after the train left Vinkovci up to the time you parted company for the night. McQueen drew his brows together. I think the conductor passed along once, he said, coming from the direction of the dining car. And a woman passed the other way, going towards it? To which woman I couldn't say. I didn't really notice. You see, I was arguing a point with Arbuthnot. I just seemed to remember a glimpse of some scarlet silk affair passing the door. I didn't, and anyway I wouldn't have seen the person's face. As you know, my carriage faces the dining car end of the train, so a woman going along the corridor in that direction would have her back to me as soon as she'd passed. Poirot nodded. She was going to the toilet, I presume. I suppose so. And you saw her return? Well, no, now that you mention it, I didn't notice her returning, but I suppose she must have done so. One more question. Do you smoke up her, Mr_McQueen? No, sir, I do not. Poirot paused a moment. I think that is all at present. I should now like to see the valet of Mr. Ratchet. By the way, did both you and he always second class? He did. But I usually went first if possible in the compartment adjoining Mr. Ratchet's _ then he had most of his baggage put in my compartment and yet could get at both it and me easily whenever he chose. But on this occasion all the first-class berths were booked except the one that he took. Elle comprehend. Thank you, Mr_McQueen. 3. The evidence of the valet the American was succeeded by the pale Englishman with the inexpressive face whom Poirot had already noticed on the day before. He stood waiting very correctly. Poirot motioned to him to sit down. You are, I understand, the valet of M. Ratchet Yes, sir. Your name? Edward Henry Masterman Your age? 30-9 and your home address? 21 Friar Street, Clerkenwell. You have heard that your master has murdered? Yes, sir. A very shocking. Will you now tell me, please, at what hour you last saw M. Ratchet? The valet considered. It must have been about 9 o'clock, sir, last night. That or a little after. Tell me in your own words exactly what happened. I went into Mr. Ratchet as usual, sir, and attended to his wants. What were your duties exactly? To fold or hang up his clothes, sir, put his dental plate in water and see that he had everything he wanted for the night. Was his manner much the same as usual? The valet considered a moment. Well, sir, I think he was upset. In what way upset? Over a letter he'd been reading. He asked me if it was I who had put it in his compartment. Of course I told him I hadn't done any such thing, but he swore at me and found fault with everything I did. Was that unusual? Oh, no, sir. He lost his temper easily, as I say. It just depended what had happened to upset. Did your master ever take a sleeping draught? Dr. Constantine leaned forward a little. Always when traveling by tram, sir. He said he couldn't sleep otherwise. Do you know what drug he was in the habit of taking? I couldn't say, I'm sure, sir. There was no name on the bottle, just the sleeping draught to be taken at bedtime _ Did he take it last night? Yes, sir. I poured it into a glass and put it on top of the toilet table ready for him. You didn't actually see him drink it? No, sir. Z. What happened next? I asked if there was anything further, and also asked what time he would like to be called in the morning. He said he didn't want to disturb till he rang. Was that usual? Quite usual, sir. When he was ready to get up he used to ring the bell for the conductor and then send him for me. Was he usually an early or a late riser? It depended, sir, on his mood. Sometimes he'd get up for breakfast, sometimes he wouldn't get up till just on lunchtime. So that you weren't alarmed when the morning wore on and no summons came? No, sir. Did you know that your master had enemies? Yes, sir. The man quite unemotionally. How did you know? I had heard him discussing some letters, sir, with Mr. McQueen. Had you an affection for your employer, Masterman? Masteney's face became, if even more inexpressive than it was normally. L should hardly like to say that, sir. He was a generous employer. But you didn't like him. Shall we put it that I don't care very much for Americans, sir? Have you ever been in America? No, sir. Do you remember reading in the paper of the Armstrong kidnapping case? A little color came into the man's cheeks. Yes, indeed, sir. A little baby girl, wasn't it? A very affair. Did you know that your employer, Mr_Ratchet, was the principal instigator in that affair? No, indeed, sir. The valet's tone held positive warmth and feeling for the first time. I can hardly believe it, sir. Nevertheless, it is true. Now, to pass to your movements last night. A matter of routine, you understand. What did you do after leaving your master? I told Mr. McQueen, sir, that the master wanted him. Then I went to my 01.VN compartment and read. Your compartment was the N second class one, sir. Next to the dining car. Poirot was looking at his plan. I see, and you had which berth? The lower one, sir. That is no 4. Yes, sir. Is there anyone in with you? Yes, sir. A big Italian fellow. He speak English. Well, a kind of English, sir. The valet's tone was deprecating. Chicago, I understand. Do you and he talk together much? He's been in America. No, sir. I prefer to read. Poirot smiled. He could visualize the scene: the large, wubble Italian, and the snub direct administered by the gentleman's gentleman. And what, may I ask, are you reading? He inquired. At present, sir, I am reading Love's Captive, by Mrs. Arabella Richardson. A story? I'll find it highly enjoyable, sir. Well, let us continue. You returned to your compartment and read Love's Captive till when? At about 10:30, sir. This Italian wanted to go to, so the conductor came and made the beds up. And then you went to and to sleep. I went to bed, sir, but I didn't sleep. Why didn't you sleep? I had the toothache, sir. Oh, la, that is painful, most painful, sir. Did you do anything for it? I applied a little oil of cloves, sir. You will lick the pain a little, but I was still not able to get to sleep. I tummed the light on above my head and continued to read, to take my mind off, as it were. And did you not go to sleep at all? Yes, sir, I dropped off about 4 in the morning. And your companion? The Italian fellow? Oh, he just snored. He did not leave the compartment at all during the night? No, sir. Did you? No, sir. Did you hear anything during the night? I don't think so, sir. Nothing unusual. I mean, the train being at a standstill made it all very quiet. Poirot was silent a moment or two. Then he spoke. Well, I think there is very little more to be said. You cannot throw any light upon the tragedy. I'm afraid not. I'm sorry, sir. As far as you know, was there any quarrel or bad between your master and Mr. McQueen? Oh. No, sir. Mr. McQueen was a very pleasant gentleman. Where were you service before you came to Mr. Ratchet? With Sir Henry Tomlinson, sir, in Grosvenor Square. Why did you him? He was going to East Africa, sir, and did not require my services any longer. But I am sure he will speak for me, sir. I was with him some years. And you have been with Mr. Ratchet how long? Just over 9 months, sir. Thank you, Mastenese. By the way, are you a pipe smoker? No, sir. I only smoke cigarettes. Gaspers, sir. Thank you, that will do. Poirot gave him a nod of dismissal. The valet hesitated a moment. "You'll excuse me, sir, but the elderly American lady is in what I might describe as a state, sir. She's saying she knows all about the murderer. She's in a very excitable condition, sir." "In that case," said Poirot, smiling, "we had see her next." "Shall I tell her, sir? She's been demanding to see someone in authority for a long time. The conductor's been trying to possio her. Send her to us, my friend," said Poirot. "We will listen to her story now." For the evidence of the American lady, Mrs. Hubbard arrived in the dining car in such a state of breathless excitement that she was hardly able to articulate her words. "Now just tell me this, who's in authority here? Got some very important information, very important indeed, and I'm going to tell it to someone in authority just as soon as I can. If you gentlemen," her wavering glance fluctuated between the three men. Poirot leaned forward. "Tell it to me, madam," he said. "But first, pray be seated." Mrs. Hubbard plumped heavily down onto the seat opposite to him. "What I've got to tell you is just this. There was a murder on the train last night, and the murderer was right there in my compartment." She paused to give dramatic emphasis to her words. "You are sure of this, madam?" "Of course I'm sure. The idea. I know what I'm talking about. I'll tell you everything there is to tell. I'd gotten into bed and gone to sleep, and suddenly I woke up. Everything was dark and I knew there was a man in my compartment. I was just so scared I couldn't scream, if you know what I mean. I just lay there and thought, mercy, I'm going to be killed. I just can't describe to you how I felt. These nasty trains, I thought, and all the outrages I'd read of. And I thought, well, anyway, he won't get my jewelry because, you see, I'd put that in a stocking and hidden it under my. Isn't any too comfortable, by the way, kinda bumpy, if you know what I mean, but that's neither here nor there. Where was I? Too, you realized, madam, that there was a man in your compartment?" "Yes, well, I just lay there with my eyes closed, and wondered Ivy had I'd do. And I thought, well, I'm just thankful that my daughter doesn't know the plight 12 in. And then, somehow, I got my wits about me and I felt about my hand and I pressed the bell for the conductor. I pressed it and I pressed it, but nothing happened, and I can tell you, I thought my heart was going to stop beating. Mercy, I said to myself, maybe they've murdered every single soul on the train. It was at a standstill anyhow, and there was a nasty quiet feel in the air. But I just went on pressing that bell, and oh, the relief when I heard footsteps coming running down the corridor and a knock on the door. "Come in," I screamed, and I switched on the lights at the same time. And would you believe it, there wasn't a Sue/ there. This seemed to Mrs. Hubbard to be a dramatic climax rather than an anticlimax. And what happened next, madam? Why, I told the man what had happened and he didn't seem to believe me. Seemed to imagine I'd dreamed the whole thing. I made him look under the seat, though he said there wasn't for a man to squeeze himself in there. It was plain enough that the man had got away, but there had a man there, and it just made me mad the way the conductor tried to soothe me down. I'm not one to imagine things, mister. I don't think I know your name." "Poirot, madam, and this is M. Book, a director of the company, and Dr_Constantine. Mrs. Hubbard murmured, "Pleased to meet you, I'm sure," to all three of them in an abstracted manner, and then plunged once more into her recital. "Now I'm just not going to pretend I was as bright as I might have been. I got it into my head that it was the man from next door, the poor fellow who's been killed. I told the conductor to look at the door between the compartments, and sure enough it wasn't bolted. Well, I soon saw to that. I told him to bolt it then and there, and after he'd gone out I got up and put a suitcase against it to make sure. What time was this, Mrs. Hubbard? Well, I'm sure I can't tell you. I never looked to see. I was so upset. And what is your theory now? Why, I should say it was just as plain could be. The man in my compartment was the murderer. Who else could he be? And you think he went back into the adjoining compartment? How do I know where he went? I had my eyes tight shut. He might have slipped out through the door into the corridor. Well, I couldn't say. You see, I had my eyes tight shut. Mrs. Hubbard sighed convulsively. Mercy, I was scared. If my daughter only knew. You do not think, madam, that what you heard was the noise of someone moving about next door the murdered man's compartment? No, I do not, mister. What is, the man was right there in the same compartment with me, and what's more, I've got proof of it. Triumphantly, she hauled a large handbag into view and proceeded to burrow in its interior. She took out two large clean handkerchiefs, a pair of horn-rimmed glasses, a bottle of aspirin, a packet of Glauber's salts, a celluloid tube of bright green peppermints, a bunch of keys, a pair of scissors, of American Express checks, a snapshot of an extraordinarily plain-looking child, some letters, 5 strings of pseudo-oriental, and a small metal object, a button _ You see this button? Well, it's not one of my buttons. It's not off anything got. I found it this morning when I got up _2. As she placed it on the table, book _ leaned forward and gave an exclamation. But this is a button from the tunic of a wagon-lit attendant. There may be a natural explanation for that, said Poirot. He turned gently to the lady. This button, madam, may have dropped from the conductor's uniform, either when he searched your cabin or when he was making the bed up last night. I just don't know what's the matter with all you people. Seems as though you don't want to do anything but make objections. Now listen here. I was reading a magazine last night before I went to sleep. Before I turned the light out, I placed that magazine on a little case that was standing on the floor near the window. Have you got that? They assured her that they had. Very well then. The conductor looked under the seat from near the door, and then he came in and bolted me and the next compartment, but he never went near the window. Well, this morning that button was lying right on top of the magazine. What do you call that, I should like to know? That, madam, I call evidence, said Poirot. The answer seemed to appease the lady. It makes me madder than a hornet to be disbelieved, she explained. You have given us most interesting and valuable evidence, said Poirot soothingly. Now may I ask you a few questions? Why, certainly. How was it, since you were nervous of this man Ratchet, that you hadn't already bolted the B5 in the compartments? I had, returned Mrs. Hubbard promptly. Oh, you had. Well, as a matter of fact, I asked that Swedish creature, a pleasant soul, if it was bolted, and she said it was. How was it you couldn't see for yourself? Because I was in bed and my sponge bag was hanging on the door handle. What time was it when you asked her to do this for you? Now let me think. It must have been round about 10:30 or 11:15. She'd come along to see if I had an aspirin. I told her where to find it and she got it out of my grip. You yourself were in bed. Suddenly she laughed. Poor soul, she was so upset. You see, she'd opened the next compartment by mistake. Ratchets. Yes. You know how difficult it is as you come along the train and all the doors are shut. She opened his by mistake. She was very distressed. He'd laughed, it seemed, and I guess he said something not quite nice. Poor thing, she certainly was upset. Oh. I make mistake, she said. I ashamed make mistake. Not nice man, she said. He say, you old. Dr. Constantine sniggered, and nears. Hubbard immediately froze him with a glance. He wasn't a nice kind of man, she said, to say a thing like that to a lady. It's not right to laugh at such things. Dr. Constantine hastily apologized. Did you hear any noise from near Ratchet's compartment after that? Asked Poirot. Well, not exactly. What do you mean by that, madam? Well, she paused. He snored, did he? Terribly. The night before, it kept me awake. You didn't hear him snore after you had had the scare about a man being in your compartment? Why, Mr. Poirot, how could I? He was dead. Yes, truly, said Poirot. He can just Do you remember the affair of the Armstrong kidnapping, Mrs. Hubbard? He asked. Yes, indeed I do. And how the wretch that did it escaped scot-free? I'd have liked to get my hands on him. He has not escaped. He is dead. He died last night. You don't mean? Mrs. Hubbard half rose from her chair in excitement. But yes, I do. Ratchet was the man. Well, to think of that. I must write and tell my daughter. Now, didn't I tell you last night that that man had an evil face? I was right, you see. My daughter always says, when mama's got a hunch, you can bet your bottom dollar it's okay. Were you acquainted with any of the Armstrong family, Mrs. Hubbard? No. They McNichol in a very exclusive circle, but I've always heard that Mrs. Armstrong was a perfectly lovely woman and that her husband worshipped her. Well, Hubbard, you have helped us very much indeed. Perhaps you will give me your frill name. Why, certainly. Caroline Martha Hubbard. Will you write your address down here? Mrs. Hubbard did so, without ceasing to speak. I just can't get over it. Cassetti on this train. I had a hunch about that man, didn't I, Mr. Poirot? Yes, indeed, madam. By the way, have you a scarlet silk dressing gown? Mercy, what a onny question. Why, no. I've got two dressing gowns with me, a pink flannel one that's kind of cozy for on board ship, and one my daughter gave me as a present, a kind of local affair in purple silk. But what in creation do you want to know about my dressing gowns for? Well, you see, madam, someone in a scarlet kimono entered either your or Mr. Ratchet's compartment last night. It is, as you said just now, very difficult when all the doors are shut to know which compartment is which. Well, no one in a scarlet dressing gown came into my compartment. Then she must have gone into near Ratchet's. Mrs. Hubbard pursed her lips together and said grimly, that wouldn't surprise me any. Poirot leaned forward. Cal, so you heard a woman's voice next door? I don't know how you guessed that, Mr. Poirot. I don't really. But well, as a matter of fact, I did. But when I asked you just now if you heard anything next, you only said you heard Mr. Ratchet snoring. Well, that was true enough. He did snore part of the time. As for the other -nirs _ Hubbard got rather embeltased _ it isn't a very nice thing to about. What time was it when you heard a woman's voice? I can't tell you. I just woke up for a minute and heard a woman talking, and it was plain enough where she was. So I just thought, well, that's the kind of man he is. I'm not surprised, and then I went to sleep again. And I'm sure I should never have mentioned anything of the kind to three strange gentlemen if you hadn't dragged it out of me. Was it before the scare about the man in your compartment, or after? Why, that's like what you said just now. He wouldn't had a woman talking to him if he were dead, would he? Pardon. You must think me very stupid, madam. I guess even you get kinda muddled now and them. I just can't get over it's being that monster Cassetti _LV / hat. My daughter will say Poirot managed adroitly to help the good lady to replace the contents of her handbag, and he then shepherded her towards the door. At the last moment, he said, "You have dropped your handkerchief, madam." Mrs. Hubbard looked at the little scrap of cambric he held out to her. "That's not mine, Mr. Poirot. I've got Madame right here. Pardon. I thought as it had the initial H on it." "Well, now, that's onny, but it's certainly not mine. Mine are marked and they're sensible things, not expensive Paris fallals _ What good is a handkerchief like that to anybody's nose?" None of the three men seemed to have an answer to this question, and Mrs. Hubbard sailed out triumphantly. 5 The evidence of the Swedish lady. Book I was handling the button that Mrs. Hubbard had left behind her. This button. I cannot understand it. Does it mean that after all, Pierre Michel is involved in some way? He asked. He paused, then continued, as Poirot did not reply. "What have you to say, my friend?" "That button, it suggests possibilities," said Poirot thoughtfully. Let us interview next the Swedish lady before we discuss the evidence that we have heard. He sorted through the pile of passports in front of him. "Ah, here we are. Greta Olsen, age 49 M." Book gave directions to the restaurant attendant, and presently the lady with the yellowish-gray bun of hair and the long, mild, sheep-like face was ushered in. She peered short-sightedly at Poirot through her glasses, but was quite calm. It transpired that she understood and spoke French, so the conversation took place in that language. Poirot first asked her the questions to which he already knew the answers: her name, age, and address. He then asked her her occupation. She was, she told him, matron in a missionary school near Stamboul. She was a trained nurse. "You know, of course, of what took place last night, mademoiselle?" "Naturally. It is very dreadful _ and the American lady tells me that the murderer was actually in her compartment." "I hear, mademoiselle, that you were the last person to see the murdered man." "I do not know. It may be so. I opened the door of his compartment by mistake. I was much ashamed. It was a most awkward mistake." "You actually saw him?" "Yes. He was reading I apologized quickly and withdrew." "Did he say anything to you?" A slight flush showed on the worthy lady's cheek. "He laughed and said a few words. I did not quite catch them." "And what did you do after that, mademoiselle?" asked Poirot, passing from the subject tactfully. "I went into the American lady, Mrs. Hubbard. I asked her for some aspirin and she gave it to." "Did she ask you whether the communicating door between her compartment and that of Mr. was bolted?" "Yes." "And was it?" "And after that?" "After that I went back to my compartment, took the aspirin, and lay down." "What time was all this?" "When I got into it was 5 minutes to 11. I know because I had my watch before I wound it up." 58 Did you go to sleep quickly?" "Not very quickly. My head got better, but I lay awake some time." "Had the train come to a stop before you went to sleep?" "I do not think so. We stopped, I think, at a station just as I was getting drowsy. That would be Vinkovci _ Now your compartment, mademoiselle, is this one?" He indicated it on the plan. "That is so, yes." "You had the upper or the lower berth?" "The lower berth, no 10. "And you had a companion?" "Yes, a young English lady. Very nice, very amiable. She had traveled from Baghdad." "After the train left, did she leave the compartment?" "No, I am sure she did not." "Why are you sure? If you were asleep?" "I sleep very lightly. I am used to waking at a sound." I am sure that if she had come down from the berth above I should have awakened. Did you yourself leave the compartment? Not until this morning. Have you a scarlet silk kimono, mademoiselle? No, indeed. I have a good comfortable dressing gown of Jaeger material, and the lady you, Miss Debenham? You hat color is her dressing gown. A pale mauve abyss such as you buy in the East. Poirot _. Then he asked in a friendly tone, why are you taking this journey? A holiday. Yes, I am going home for a holiday. But first I am going to Lausanne to stay with a sister for a week or so. Perhaps you will so amiable as to write me down the name and address of your sister. With pleasure. She took the paper and he gave her and wrote down the name and address as requested. Have you ever been in America, mademoiselle? No, I very nearly went once. I was to go with an invalid lady, but the plan was cancelled at the last moment. I much regretted this. They are very good, the Americans. They give much money to found schools and hospitals. And they are very practical. Do you remember hearing of the Armstrong kidnapping case? No, what was that? Poirot explained. Greta Olson was indignant. Her yellow bun of hair quivered with her emotion. That there are in the world such evil men. It tries one's faith. The PCOR mother, my heart aches for her. The amiable Swede departed, her kindly face flushed, her eyes sumelsed with tears. Poirot was writing busily on a sheet of paper. What is it you write there, my friend? Asked M_mon cher. It is my habit to be neat and orderly. I make here a little chronological table of. He finished writing and passed the paper to M_9.15 train leaves Belgrade. About 9.40 about 10.00 about 10_40 0.10 0.30 0.37 about I-17 Thai plus MURD valet leaves Ratchet with sleeping draft bide him McQueen leaves Ratchet Greta Olson sees Ratchet, last seen alive. N.B. He was awake reading a book. Tram leaves Vimkovci, late. Train runs into a snowdrift. Ratchet's bell rings. Conductor answers it. Ratchet says, "Cen Streen." J.E. me sweet trompe Mrs. Hubbard thinks man in her carnage. Rings for conductor. M. nodded approval. That is very clear, he said. There is nothing there that strikes you as at all odd. No, it seems all quite clear and above board. It seems quite plain that the crime was committed at 1_15_ the evidence of the IVACH shows us that, and Hubbard's story fits in. For my mind, I will make a guess at the identity of the murderer. I say, my friend, that it is the big Italian. He comes from America, from Chicago, and remember, an Italian's weapon is the knife, and he stabs not once but several times. That is true. Without a doubt, that is the solution of the mystery. Doubtless he and this Ratchet were in this kidnapping business together. Cassetti is an Italian name. In some way Ratchet did on him what they call the double cross. The Italian tracks him down, sends him warning letters first, and finally revenges himself upon him in a brutal way. It is all quite simple. Poirot shook his head doubtfully. It is hardly so simple as that, I fear, he murmured. Me, I am convinced it is the truth, said M. becoming more and more enamored of his theory. And what about the valet with the toothache who swears that the Italian never left the compartment? That is the difficulty. Poirot twinkled. Yes, it is annoying, that. Unlucky for your theory, and extremely lucky for our Italian friend that M. Ratchet's valet should have had the toothache. It will explain, said M. with magnificent certainty. Poirot shook his head again. No, it is hardly so simple as that, he murmured again. Point 6 The evidence of the Russian princess. Let us hear what Pierre Michel has to say. This button, he said. The wagon-lit conductor was recalled. He looked at them inquiringly. M. Book cleared his throat. Michel, he said, here is a button from your tunic. It was found in the American ladies' compartment. What have you to say for yourself about it? The conductor's hand went automatically to his tunic. I have lost no button, monsieur, he said. There must be some mistake. That is very odd. I cannot account for it, monsieur. The man seemed astonished, but not in any way guilty or confused. M. Book said meaningly, owing to the circumstances in which it was found, it seems fairly certain that this button was dropped by the man who was in Mrs. Hubbard's compartment last night when she rang the bell. But, monsieur, there was no one there. The lady must imagined it. She did not imagine it, Michel. The assassin of M. Ratchet passed that way and dropped that button. As the significance of M. Book's words became plain to him, Pierre Michel flew into a violent state of agitation. It is not true, monsieur, it is not time, he cried. You are accusing me of the crime. Me, I am innocent. The first am absolutely innocent. Why should I want to kill a Monsieur Ivy whom I have seen before? Where were you when Mrs. Hubbard's rang? I told you, monsieur, in the next coach talking to my colleague. We will send for him. Do so, monsieur, I implore you, do so. The conductor of the next coach was summoned. He immediately confirmed Pierre Michel's statement. He added that the conductor from the Bucharest coach had also been there. The three of them had discussing the situation caused by the snow. They had been talking some 10 minutes when Michel fancied he heard a bell. As he opened the doors connecting the two coaches, they had all heard it plainly, a bell ringing repeatedly. Michel had none post-haste to answer it. So you see, monsieur, I am not guilty, cried Michel anxiously. And this button from a wagon-lit tunic, how do you explain it? I cannot, monsieur. It is a mystery to me. All my buttons are intact. Both of the other conductors also declared that they had not lost a button, also that they had not been inside Mrs. Hubbard's compartment at any time. Calm yourself, Michel, said M. Book, and cast your mind back to the moment when you ran to answer Mrs. Hubbard's bell. Did you meet anyone at all in the corridor? No, monsieur. Did you see anyone going away from you down the corridor in the other direction? Again, no, monsieur. Z0DD, said M. Book. Not so very, said Poirot. It is a question of time. Mrs. Hubbard Ivax to find someone in her compartment. For a minute or two she lies paralyzed, her eyes shut. Probably it was then that the man slipped out into the corridor. Then she starts ringing the bell, but the conductor CLKRS not come at once. It is only the third or fourth peal that he hears. I should say myself that there was ample time for what? For what, mon cher? Remember, there are thick drifts of snow all round the train. There are two courses open to our mysterious assassin, said Poirot slowly. He could retreat into either off toilets or he could disappear into one of the compartments. But they were all occupied. Yes. You mean that he could retreat into his own compartment? Poirot nodded. It fits, murmured M. Book. During that 10 minutes absence of the conductor, the murderer comes from his OUTL compartment, goes into Ratchet's, kills him, lakes and chains on the inside, goes out through Mrs. Hubbard's compartment, and is back safely in his own compartment by the time the conductor arrives. Poirot murmured, it is not quite so simple as that, my friend. Our friend the doctor here will tell you so. With a gesture M. Book signified that the three conductors might depart. We have still to see 8 passengers, said Poirot. 5 first-class passengers: Princess Dragomirov, Count and Countess Andrini, Colonel Arbuthnot, and Mr. Hardman. 3 second-class passengers: Miss Debenham, Antonio Foscarelli, and the lady's maid, Fräulein Schmidt. Whom will you see first? The Italian. How you harp on your Italian. No, we will start at the top of the tree. Perhaps Madame la Princesse will be so good as to spare us a few moments of her time. Convey that message to her, Michel. Oui, monsieur, said the conductor, who was just leaving the car. Tell her we can wait on her in her compartment if she does not wish to put herself to the trouble of coming here, called M. Book. But Princess Dragomirov declined to take this course. She appeared in the dining car, inclined her head slightly and sat down opposite Poirot. Her small toad-like face looked even yellower than the day before. She was certainly ugly, and yet, like the toad, she had eyes like jewels, dark and imperious, revealing latent energy and an intellectual force that could be felt at once. Her voice was deep, very distinct, with a slight grating quality in it. She cut short a flowery phrase of from M. Book. You need not offer apologies, messieurs. I understand a murder has taken place. Naturally you must interview all the passengers. I shall glad to give you all the assistance in my power. You are most amiable, madam, said Poirot. Not at all. It is a duty. What do you wish to know? Your L11 Christian names and address, madam. Perhaps you would prefer to write them yourself. Poirot proffered a sheet of paper and pencil, but the princess waved them aside. 62. You can write it, she said. There is nothing difficult. Natalia Dragomirov, 17 Avenue Kléber, Paris. You are traveling home from Constantinople, madam? Yes. I have been staying at the Austrian embassy. My maid is with me. Would you be so good as to give me a brief account of your movements last night from dinner onwards? Willingly. I directed the conductor to make up my bed whilst I was in the dining car. I retired to bed immediately after dinner. I read until the hour of when I turned out my light. I was unable to sleep owing to certain rheumatic pains from which I suffer. At about 1:45 I rang for my maid. She massaged me and then read aloud till I felt sleepy. I cannot say exactly when she left me. It may have been half an hour afterward, it may have been later. The train had stopped then. The train had stopped. You heard nothing unusual during the time, madam? I heard nothing unusual. What is your maid's name? Hildegard Schmidt. She has been with you long? 15 years. You consider her trustworthy? Absolutely. Her people come from an estate of my late husband's in Germany. You have been in America, I presume, madam? The abrupt change of subject made the old lady raise her eyebrows. Many times. Were you at any time acquainted with a family of the name of Armstrong, a family in which a tragedy occulted? With some emotion in her. 73 Ice. The old lady said, you speak of friends of mine, monsieur. You knew Colonel Armstrong well, then? I knew him slightly, but his wife, Sonia Armstrong, was my goddaughter. I was on terms of friendship with her mother, the actress, Linda Arden. Linda Arden was a great genius, one of the greatest tragic actresses in the world. As Lady Ma and as Magda, there was no one to touch her. I was not only an admirer of her I was a personal friend. She is dead. No, she is alive, but she lives in complete retirement. Her health is very delicate, and she has to lie on a sofa most of the time. There was, I think, a second daughter. Yes, much younger than Mrs. Armstrong. And she is alive. Certainly underscore where is she? The old woman bent an acute glance at him. I must ask you the reason for these questions. What they to do with the matter in hand, the murder on this train? They are connected in this way, madam. The man who was murdered was the man responsible for the kidnapping and murder of Mrs. Armstrong's child. The straight brows came together. Princess Dragomirov drew herself a little more erect. In my view, then, this murder is an entirely admirable happening. You will pardon my slightly biased of view. It is most natural, madam. And now to return to the question you did not answer. Where is the younger daughter of Linda Arden, the sister of Mrs. Armstrong? I honestly cannot tell you, monsieur. I have lost touch with the younger generation. I believe she married an Englishman some years ago and went to England, but at the moment I cannot recollect the name. She paused a minute and then said, is there anything funnier you want to ask me, gentlemen? Only one thing, madam, a somewhat personal question. The color of your dressing gown underscore. She raised her eyebrows slightly. I must suppose you have a reason for such a question. My dressing gown is of black satin. There is nothing more, madam. I am much obliged to you for answering my questions so prompt. She made a slight gesture with her heavily bearing hand. Then as she rose, and the others rose with her, she stopped. You will excuse me, monsieur, she said, may I ask your name? Your face is somehow familiar to me. My name, madam, is Hercule Poirot, at your service. She was silent a minute, then, Hercule Poirot, she said. Yes. I remember now. This is destiny underscore. She walked away, very erect, a little stiff in her movements. Voila UNC grande dame, said M. Book underscore. What do you think of her, my friend? But Hercule Poirot merely shook his head. I am wondering, he said, what she meant by destiny. 647 The evidence of Count and Countess Andrini. Count and Countess Andrini were next summoned. The Count, however, entered the dining car. There was no doubt that he was a fine-looking man seen face to face. He was at least 6 feet in height, with broad shoulders and slender hips. He was dressed in very ill-cut English tweeds and might have taken for an Englishman had it not been for the length of his mustache and something in the line of the cheekbone. Well, messieurs, he said, what can I do for you? You understand, monsieur, said Poirot, that in view of what has occurred I am obliged to put certain questions to all the passengers. Perfectly, perfectly, said the Count easily. I'll quite understand your position. Not, I fear, that my wife and I can do much to assist you. We were asleep and heard nothing at all. Are you aware of the identity of deceased, monsieur? I was the big American, a man with a decidedly unpleasant face. He sat at that table at meal times. He indicated with a nod of his head the table at which Ratchet and McQueen had sat. Yes, yes, monsieur, you are perfectly correct. I meant, did you know the name of the man underscore? No. The Count looked thoroughly puzzled by Poirot's queries. If you haven't to know his name, he said, surely it is on his passport. The name on his passport is Ratchet, said Poirot. But that, monsieur, is not his real name. He is the man Cassetti, who was responsible for a celebrated kidnapping outrage in America. I've watched the Count closely as he 6K, but the latter seemed quite unaffected by this piece of news. He merely opened his eyes a little. Ah, he said, that certainly should throw light upon the matter. An extraordinary country, America underscore. You have been there, perhaps, Monsieur le Comte. I was in Washington for a year. You knew, perhaps, the Armstrong family. Armstrong LT is difficult to recall, one met so many. He smiled, shrugged his shoulders. But to come back to the matter in hand, gentlemen, he said. What more can I do to assist you? You retired to rest when, Monsieur le Comte? Hercule Poirot's eyes stole to his plan. Count and Countess Andrini compartment NOS 12 and 13 adjoining. We had one compartment made up for the night whilst we were in the dining car. On returning we sat in the other for a while. Which number would that be? Number 13. We played piquet together. At about 11 o'clock my wife retired for the night. The conductor made up my compartment and I also went to bed. I slept soundly until momming underscore. Did you notice the stopping of the train? I was not aware of it till this momming underscore. And your wife? The Count smiled. My wife always takes a sleeping draught when traveling by train. She took her usual dose of Trianol underscore. He paused. I am sorry I am not able to assist you in any way. Poirot passed him a sheet of paper and a pen. Thank you, Monsieur le Comte. It is a formality, but will you just let me have your name and address? The Count wrote slowly and carefully. It is just as well that I should write this for you, he said pleasantly. The SRRLLMG of my country estate is a little difficult for those unacquainted with the language. He passed the paper across to Poirot and rose. It will be quite unnecessary for my wife to come here, he said. She can tell you nothing more than I have. A little gleam came into Poirot's eye. Doubtless, he said, but all the same I think I should like to have just one little word with Madame la Comtesse. I assure you it is quite unnecessary. The Count's voice rang out authoritatively. Poirot blinked gently at him. It will a mere formality, he said, but, you understand, it is necessary for my report. As you please. The Count gave way grudgingly. He made a short foreign bow and left the dining car. Poirot reached out a hand to a passport. It set out the Count's names and titles. He passed on to the further information. Accompanied by, wife, Christian name, Elena Maria, maiden name, Goldenberg, age, 20. A spot of grease had been dropped on it at some time by a careless official. A diplomatic passport, said M. Book underscore. We must be careful, my friend, to give no offense. These people can have nothing to do with the murder underscore. Be easy, mon vieux, I will be most tactile underscore. A mere formality. His voice dropped as the Countess Andrini entered the dining car. She looked timid and extremely charming. You wish to see me, messieurs? A mere formality, Madame la Comtesse. Poirot rose gallantly, bowed her into the seat opposite him. It is only to ask you if you saw or heard anything last night that may throw light upon this matter underscore. Nothing at all, monsieur. I was asleep. You did not hear, for instance, a commotion going on in the compartment next to yours? The American lady who occupies it had quite an attack of hysterics and rang for the conductor. I heard nothing, monsieur. You see, I had taken a sleeping draught. Ah, I comprehend. Well, I need not detain you all the underscore then, as she rose swiftly. Just one little minute. These particulars, your maiden name, age and so on, they are correct? Quite correct, monsieur. Perhaps I will sign this memorandum to that effect, then. She signed quickly in a graceful slanting handwriting. Elena Andrini. Did you accompany your husband to America, madam? No, monsieur. She smiled, flushed a little. We were not married then, we married only a year underscore. All, yes, thank you, madam. By the way, does your husband smoke? She stared at him as she stood poised for departure. Yes. A pipe? No. Cigarettes and cigars? Ah. Thank you. She lingered, her eyes watching him curiously. Inveigling eyes they were, dark and almond-shaped with very long black lashes that swept the exquisite pallor of her cheeks. Her lips, very scarlet in the foreign fashion, were parted just a little. She looked exotic and beautiful. Why did you ask me that? Madam, Poirot waved an airy hand, detectives have to ask all sorts of questions. For instance, perhaps you will tell me the color of your dressing gown. She stared at him. Then she laughed. It is calm-colored chiffon. Is that really important? Very important, madam. She asked curiously, are you really a detective, then? At your service, madam. I thought there were no detectives on the train when it passed through Yugoslavia. Not until one got to Italy. I am not a Yugoslavian detective, madam. I am an international detective. You belong to the League of Nations. I belong to the world, madam, said Poirot dramatically. He went on, I work mainly in London. You speak English, he added in that language. I a little, yes. Her accent was charming. Poirot bowed once more. We will not detain you further, madam. You see, it was not so very terrible. She smiled, inclined her head and departed. El estilifame, said M. Book appreciatively. He sighed. Well, that did not advance us. No, said Poirot. 'Two people who saw nothing and heard nothing. Shall we now see the Italian? Poirot did not reply for a moment. He was studying a grease spot on a Hungarian diplomatic passport. 8 The evidence of Colonel Arbuthnot. Poirot roused himself with a slight start. His eyes twinkled a little as they met the eager ones of M. Book _Al. My dear old friend, he said, you see I have become what they call the snob. The first class, I feel it should be attended to before the second class. Next, I think, we will interview the good-looking Colonel Arbuthnot. Finding the Colonel's French to be of a severely limited description, Poirot conducted his interrogatory in English. Arbuthnot's name, age, home address, and exact military standing were all ascertained. Poirot proceeded. It is that you come home from India on what is called the leave, what we can call en permission. Colonel Arbuthnot, uninterested in what a pack of foreigners called anything, replied with TME British brevity, yes. But you do not come home on the P&O boat. Why not? I chose to come by the overland route for reasons of my own. And that, his manner seemed to say, is one for you, you interfering little jackanars _, you came straight through from India. The colonel replied drily, L stopped for one night to see Ur of the Chaldees, and for 3 days in Baghdad with the AO who happens to be an old friend of mine. You stopped 3 days in Baghdad. I understand that the young English lady, Miss Debenham, also comes from Baghdad. Perhaps you met her there. No, I did not. I first met Miss Debenham when she and I shared the railway convoy car from Kirkuk to Nisibin _ Poirot leaned forward _ he persuasive and a little more foreign than he need have. Monsieur, I am about to appeal to you. You and Miss Debenham are the only 2 English people on the train. It is necessary that I should ask you each your opinion of the other. Highly irregular, said Colonel Arbuthnot coldly _ not so. You see, this crime, it was most probably committed by a woman. The man was stabbed no fewer than 5 times. Even the chef de train said at once, it is a woman. Well, then, what is my first task? To give all the women traveling on the Istanbul-Calais coach what Americans call the once-over _, but to judge of an Englishwoman is difficult. They are very reserved, the English. So I to you, monsieur, in the interest of justice. What sort of person is this Miss Debenham? What do you know about her? Miss Debenham, said the colonel with some warmth, is a lady. Ah, said Poirot with every appearance of being much gratified. So you do not think that she is likely to be implicated in this crime? The idea is absurd, said Arbuthnot. The man was a perfect stranger, she had never seen him before. Did she tell you so? She did. She commented at once upon his somewhat unpleasant appearance. If a woman is concerned, as you seem to think, to my mind without any evidence but on a mere assumption, I can assure you that Miss could not possibly be implicated. You feel warmly in the matter, said Poirot with a smile. Colonel Arbuthnot gave him a cold stare. I really don't know what you mean, he said. The stare seemed to abash Poirot. He dropped his eyes and began fiddling with the papers in front of him. All this is by the way, he said. Let us be practical and come to facts. This crime, we have reason to believe, took place at 1:15 last night. It is part of the necessary routine to ask everyone on the train what he or she was doing at that time. Quite so. At 1:15, to the best of my belief, I was talking to the young American fellow secretary to the dead man. Ah! Were you in his compartment, or was he in yours? I was in his. That is the young man of the name of McQueen. He was a friend or acquaintance of yours? No, I never saw him before this Jimmy _ we fell into casual conversation yesterday and both became interested. I don't as a rule like Americans, haven't any use for M2. Poirot smiled, remembering McQueen's strictures on Britishers, but I liked this young fellow. He'd got hold of some tomfool idiotic ideas about the situation in India. That's the worst of Americans, they're so sentimental and idealistic. Well, he was interested in what I had to tell him. I've had nearly 30 years' experience of the country and I was interested in what he had to tell me about the working of prohibition in America. Then we got down to world politics in general. I was quite surprised to look at my watch and find it was 1:45. That is the time you broke up this conversation. What did you do then? Walked along to my own compartment and turned in. Your bed was made up ready? That is the compartment, let me see, no _15, the one next but one to the end away from the dining car. Yes. Where was the conductor when you went to your compartment? Sitting at the end at a little table. As a matter of fact, McQueen called him just as I went into my compartment. Why did he call him? To make up his bed, I suppose. The compartment hadn't been made up for the night. Now, Colonel Arbuthnot, I want you to think carefully during the time you were talking to Mr. McQueen, did anyone pass along the corridor outside the door? Many people, I should think. I wasn't paying attention. Ah. But I am referring to, let us say, the last hour and a half of your conversation. You got out at Vinkovci, didn't you? Yes, but only for a minute. There was a blizzard on. The cold was something frightful, made one quite thankful to get back to the fog, though as a rule I think the way these trams are overheated is something scandalous. Bookside. It is very difficult to please, he said. The English, they open everything, then others they come along and shut everything. It is very difficult. Neither Poirot nor Colonel Arbuthnot paid any attention to him. Now, monsieur, cast your mind back, said Poirot encouragingly. It was cold outside. You have returned to the train. You sit down again, you a cigarette wraps a pip. He paused for the fraction of a second. A pipe for me. McQueen smoked cigarettes. The train stalls agime. You smoke your pipe. You discuss the state of Europe, of the world _ it is late now. Most have retired for the night. Does anyone pass the think? Arbuthnot frowned in the effort of remembrance. Difficult to say, he said. You see, I wasn't paying any attention. But you HME the soldier's observation for detail. You notice without noticing, so to Sir _K _ the colonel thought again, but his head. I couldn't say. I don't remember anyone passing except the conductor. Wait a minute, and there was a woman, I think you saw her? Was she old young? Didn't see her. Wasn't looking that way. Just a rustle and a sort of smell of scent. A good scent. Well, rather fruity, if you know what I mean. I mean you'd smell it 100 yards away, but mind you, the colonel went on hastily, this may have been earlier in the evening. You see, as you said just now, it was just one of those things you notice without noticing, so to some time that evening I said to myself, woman scent got it on pretty thick. But when it Ivis I can, be sure, except that why, yes, it must have been after Vinkovsy_y. Because I remember sniffing, you know, just Ivy hen I was talking the utter Ivis how Stalin's 5-year plan was turning out. I know the idea woman brought the idea of the position of women in Russia into my mind. And I know we hadn't got on to Russia until pretty the end of our talk. You can pin it down more definitely than that. And no underscore it must have been roughly within the last half hour. It was after the train had stopped. The other NKX1DED underscore yes, I'm almost sure it was. Well, we will pass from that. Have you ever been in America, Colonel Arbuthnot? Never. Don't want to go. Did you know a Colonel Armstrong? Armstrong I've known 2 or 3 Armstrongs underscore there was Tommy Armstrong in the 60th you don't mean him. And Selby Armstrong he was killed on the Somme underscore 2L mean the Colonel Armstrong who married an American wife and whose only child was kidnapped and killed. All, yes, I remember reading about affair. I don't think I actually ever came across the fellow, though of course I knew of him. Toby Armstrong. Nice fellow. Everybody liked him. He had a very distinguished career. Got the VC. The man who was killed last night was the man responsible for the murder of Colonel Armstrong's child. Arbuthnot's face grew rather grim. Then in my opinion the swine deserved what he got, though I would have preferred to see him purely hanged and electrocuted, I suppose, over there underscore in fact, Colonel Arbuthnot, you prefer law and order to private vengeance. Well, you can't go having blood feuds and stabbing each other like Corsicans or the Mafia, said the colonel. Say what you like, trial by jury is a sound system. Poirot looked at him thoughtfully for a minute or two underscore yes, he said. I am sure that would be your view. Well, Colonel Arbuthnot, I do not think there is anything more I to ask you. There is nothing you yourself can recall last night that in any way snuck you, or shall we say strikes you now, back as suspicious? Arbuthnot considered for a moment or two. No, he said. Nothing at all. Unless too he hesitated. But yes, continue, I pray of you. Well, it's nothing really, said the colonel slowly. But you said anything. Yes, yes. Go on. Oh. It's nothing. A mere detail. But as I got back to my compartment I noticed that the door of the one mine the end one, you know, yes, no 16. Well, the door of it was not quite closed. And the fellow inside peered out in a furtive sort of way. Then he pulled the door to quickly. Of course I know there's nothing in that, but it just struck me as a bit, I mean, it's quite usual to open a door and stick your head out if you want to see anything. But it was the furtive way he did it that caught my attention. Yes, said Poirot doubtfully. I told you there was nothing to it, said Arbuthnot, apologetically. But you know what it is, early hours of the morning, everything very still, the thing had a sinister look like a detective story. All nonsense really. He rose. Well, if you don't want me any more to thank you, Colonel Arbuthnot, there is nothing else. The soldier hesitated for a minute. His first natural distaste for questioned by foreigners had evaporated. About Miss Debenham, he said rather awkwardly. You can take it from me that she's all right, she's a pukka sahib. Flushing a little, he withdrew. What, asked Dr. Constantine with interest, does a pukka sahib mean? It means, said Poirot, that Miss Debenham's father and brothers were at the same kind of school as Colonel Arbuthnot was. Oh, said Dr. Constantine, disappointed. Then it has nothing to do with the crime at all. Exactly, said Poirot. He fell into a reverie, beating a light tattoo on the table. Then he looked up. Colonel Arbuthnot smokes a pipe, he said. In the compartment of Mr. Ratchet I found a pipe cleaner. Mr_Ratchet smoked only cigars. He is the only man so far who admits to smoking a PLPE_, and he knew of Colonel Armstrong, perhaps actually did know him, though he won't admit it. So you think it possible? Poirot shook his head violently. That is just it. It is impossible, quite impossible, that an honorable, slightly stupid, upright Englishman should stab an enemy 12 times with a knife. Do you not feel, my friends, how it is? That is the psychology, said M_, and one must respect the psychology. This crime has a signature, and it is certainly not the signature of Colonel Arbuthnot. But now to our next interview. This time M. did not mention the Italian. But he thought of him. 729. The evidence of M.R. Hardman, the last of the first-class passengers to be interviewed, NLR_Hardman, was the big flamboyant American who had shared a table with the Italian and the valet. He wore a somewhat loud check suit, a pink shin and a flashy tie pin, and was rolling something round his tongue as he entered the dining car. He had a big, fleshy, coarse-featured face, with a good-humored expression. "Moming, gentlemen," he said. "What can I do for you? You have heard of this murder, Mr. Hardman?" "Sure." He shifted the chewing gum deftly. "We are of necessity interviewing all the passengers on the train." "That's all right by me. Guess that's the only way to tackle the job." Poirot consulted the passport lying in front of him. "You are Cyrus Bethman Hardman, United States subject, 41 years of age, traveling salesman for typewriting ribbons, okay? That's you are traveling from to Paris?" "That's so." "Reason?" "Business." "Do you always travel first class, Nair_Hardman?" "Yes, sir. The firm pays my traveling expenses." He winked. "Now, Mr. Hardman, we come to the events of last night." The American nodded. "What can you tell us the matter?" "Exactly nothing at all. That is a pity." "Perhaps, Mr. Hardman, you will tell us exactly what you did last night from dinner onwards." For the first time the American did not seem ready with his reply. At last he said, "Excuse me, gentlemen, but just who are you? Put me wise." "This is M. a director of the company de Wagons Litz_. This gentleman is the D.L. Reuter who examined the body, and you yourself I am Hercule Poirot. I am engaged by the company to investigate this matter." "I've heard of you," said Mr. Hardman. He reflected a minute or two longer. "Guess I'd better come clean." "It will certainly advisable for you to tell us all you know," said Poirot drily. "You'd have said a mouthful if there was anything I did know. But I don't. I know nothing at all, just as I said. But I ought to know something. That's what makes me sore. I ought to." "Please explain, Mr_Hardman." Mr. Hardman sighed, removed the chewing gum, and dived into a pocket. At the same time his whole personality seemed to undergo a change. He became less of a stage character and more of a real person. The resonant nasal tones of his voice became "That passport's a bit of bluff," he said. "That's who I really am." Poirot scrutinized the card flip rode across to him. M. peered over his shoulder. Mr. Cyrus Hardman McNeil's New City Poirot knew the name as that of one of the best known and most reputable private detective agencies in New York. Now, Mr. Hardman, he said, let us hear the meaning of this. Sure. Things came about this way. I'd come over to Europe trailing a couple of nothing to do with this business. The chase ended in Istanbul. I wired the chief and got his instructions to return, and I would been making my tracks back to little old New York when I got this. He pushed across a letter. The Tocatlan Hotel. Dear Sir, you have been pointed out to me as an operative of the McNeil Detective Agency. Kindly report at my suite at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Se Ratchet bien. I reported at the time stated, and Mr. Ratchet put me wise to the situation. He showed me a couple of letters he'd got. He was alarmed. Pretended not to be, but he was rattled. All right, he put up a proposition to me. I was to travel by the same train as he did to Paris and see that nobody got him. Well, gentlemen, I did travel by the same train, and in spite of me, somebody did get him. I certainly feel sore it doesn't look any good for me. Did he give you any indication of the line you were to take? Sure. He had it all taped out. It was his idea that I should travel in the compartment alongside his. Well, that blew up right at the staff. The only place I could get was bin number 16, and I had a job getting that. I guess the conductor likes to keep that compartment up his sleeve. But that's neither here nor there. When I looked all round the situation, it seemed to me that number 16 was a 74 pretty good strategic position. There was only the dining car in front of the Starnbull sleeping car, and the door onto the platform at the front end was barred at night. The only way a thug could come was through the rear end door to the platform, or along the train from the rear, and in either case he'd have to pass right by my compartment. You had no idea, I suppose, of the identity of possible assailant. Well, I knew what he like. Mr. Ratchet described him to me. What? All three men leaned forward eagerly. Hardman went on. A small man, dark with a womanish kind of voice. That's what the old man said. Said, too, that he didn't think it would be the first night out, more likely the second or third. He knew something, said Book. He certainly knew more than he told his secretary, commented Poirot thoughtfully. Did he tell you anything about this enemy of his? Did he, for instance, say why his life was threatened? No, he was kinda reticent about that part of it. Just said the fellow was out for his blood and meant to get it as small a womanish .73 ice, repeated Poirot thoughtfully. Then, fixing a sharp glance on Hardman, he asked, you knew who he really was, of course. Which, Mr. Ratchet? You recognized him? I don't get you. Ratchet was Cassetti, the Armstrong murderer. Mr. Hardman gave vent to a prolonged whistle. That certainly is some surprise, he said. Yes, sir. No, I didn't recognize him. I was away out west when that case came on. I suppose I saw photos of him in the papers, but I wouldn't recognize my 0VN mother when a newspaper photographer got through with her. Well, I don't doubt that a few people had it in for Cassetti. All right, do you know of anyone connected with the Armstrong case who answers to that description? Small dark womanish voice. Hardman reflected a minute or two. It's hard to say. Pretty nearly everyone connected with that case is dead. There was the girl who threw herself out of the window, remember? Sure. That's a good point, that. She was a foreigner of some kind. Maybe she had some WAP relations. But you've got to remember that there were other cases besides the Armstrong one. Cassetti had running this kidnapping stunt for some time. You can't concentrate on that only. But we have reason to that this crime is connected with the Armstrong case. Mr. Hardman cocked an incontrim guy. Poirot did not respond. The American shook his head. "L can't call to mind anybody answering that description in the Armstrong case," he said slowly. "But of course I wasn't in it and didn't know much about it. Well, continue your narrative, Mr. Hardman _ there's very little to tell. I got my sleep in the daytime and stayed awake on the watch at night. Nothing suspicious happened the first night. Last night was the same, as far as I was concerned _ I had my door a little ajar and watched. No stranger passed." "You are sure of that, Mr. Hardman?" "I'm plumb certain. Nobody got on that train from outside, and nobody came along the train from the rear carriages. I 11 take my oath on that." "Could you see the conductor from your position?" "Sure. He sits on that little seat almost flush with my door." "Did he leave that seat at all after the train stopped at Vinkovci?" "That was the last station?" "Yes, he answered a couple of bells. That would be just after the train came to a halt for good. Then, after that, he went past me into the rear coach. Was there about a quarter of an hour. There was a ringing like mad and he came back running. I stepped out into the corridor to see what it was all about. Felt a mite nervous, you understand, but it was only the American dame. She was raising hell about something or other." I grinned. "Then he went on to another compartment and came back and got a bottle of mineral water for someone. After that he settled down in his seat till he went up to the far end to make some buddies up. I don't think he stiffed after that until about 5:00 this morning." "Did he doze off at all?" "That I can't say. He may have." Poirot nodded automatically. His hands straightened the papers on the table. He picked up the official card once more. "Be so good as just to initial this," he said. The other complied. "There is no one, I suppose, who can confirm your story of your identity, Mr. Hardman?" "On this train?" "Well, not exactly. Unless it might be young McQueen _ I know him well enough. I've seen him in his father's office in New York. But that's not to say he'll remember me from a crowd of other operatives. No, Mr. Poirot, you'll have to wait and cable New York Ivyhand the snow lets up. But it's okay. I'm not telling the tale. Well, so long, gentlemen. Pleased to have met you, Mr. Poirot." Poirot proffered his cigarette case. "But perhaps you prefer a not me." He helped himself, then strode briskly off. The three men at each other. "You think he is genuine?" asked Dr. Constantine. Yes. I know the type. Besides, it is a story that would very easy to disprove. He has given us a piece of very interesting evidence," said M. "Yes, indeed." "A small man dark with a high-pitched voice," said M. thoughtfully. "A description which applies to no one on the train," said Poirot. 10. The evidence of the Italian. "And now," said Poirot with a twinkle in his eye, "we will delight the heart of M. and see the Italian." Antonio Foscarelli came into the dining car with a swift, cat-like tread. His face at Ivas a typical Italian face, sunny-looking and swarthy. He spoke French well and fluently with only a slight accent. "Your narn is Antonio Foscarelli?" "Yes, monsieur." "You are, I see, a naturaliste American subject." The American grinned. "Yes, monsieur. It is better for my business." "You are an agent for Ford Motor Cars?" "Yes." You see, a voluble exposition followed. At the end of it, anything that the three men did not know about Foscarelli's business methods, his journeys, his income, and his opinion of the United States and most European countries seemed a negligible factor. This Ivas not a man who had to have information dragged from him. It gushed out. His good-natured, childish face beamed with satisfaction as, with a last eloquent gesture, He paused and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. So you see, he said. I do big business. I am up to date. I understand salesmanship. You have been in the United States, then, for the last 10 years on and off? Yes, monsieur. Ah. Well, do I remember the day I first the boat to go to America, so far away. My mother, my little sister Poirot cut short the flood of reminiscence. During your sojourn in the United States, did you ever come across the deceased? Never. But I know the type. Oh. Yes. He snapped his fingers expressively. It is very respectable, very well dressed, but underneath it is all tongue. Out of my experience I should say he was the big crook. I give you my opinion for what it is worth. Your opinion is quite right, said Poirot drily. Ratchet was Cassetti, the kidnapper. What did I tell you? I have learned to be very acute to read the face. It is necessary. Only in America do they teach you the proper way to sell. You remember the Armstrong case? I do not quite remember. The name, yes. It was a little girl, a baby, was it not? Yes, a very tragic affair. The Italian seemed the first person to demur to this view. Well, these things they happen, he said philosophically, in a great civilization such as America. Poirot cut him short. Did you ever come across any members of the Armstrong family? No, I do not think so. It is difficult to say. I will give you some figures. Last year alone, I sold 2, monsieur. Pray confine yourself to the point. The Italian's hands flung themselves out in a gesture of apology. 8,000 pardons. Tell me, if you please, your exact movements last night from dinner onwards. With pleasure. I stay here as long as I can. It is more amusing. I talk to the American gentleman at my table. He sells typewriter ribbons. Then I go back to my compartment. It is empty. The miserable John Bull who shares it me is away attending to his master. At last he comes back, very long face as usual. He will not talk, says yes and no. A miserable race, the English not sympathetic. He sits in the corner, very stiff, reading a book. Then the conductor comes and makes our beds. Nos 4 and murmured Poirot, exactly the end compartment. Mine is the upper berth. I get up there. I smoke and read. The little Englishman has, I think, the toothache. He gets out a little bottle of stuff that smells very strong. He lies in bed and groans. Presently I sleep. Whenever I wake I hear him groaning. Do you know if he left the carriage at all during the night? I do not think so. That, I should hear. The light from the corridor. Dne wakes up automatically, thinking it is the customs examination at some frontier. Did he ever speak of his master? Ever express any animus against him? I tell you he did not speak. He was not sympathetic. A fish. You smoke, you say, a pipe, cigarettes, cigar. Cigarettes only. Poirot proffered one, which he accepted. Have you ever been to Chicago? Inquired M.O. Yes, a fine city, but I know best New York, Cleveland, Detroit. You been to the States? No. You should go. Poirot pushed a sheet of paper across to him. If you will sign this, and put your permanent address, please. The Italian M.T0TE with a flourish. Then he rose, his smile as engaging as ever. That is all? You do not require me fun her? Good day to you, messieurs. We could get out of the snow. I have an appointment in Milan. He his head sadly. L shall lose the business. He departed. Poirot looked at his friend. He has been a long time in America, said M. Book, and he is an Italian, and Italians use the knife. And they are great liars. I do not like Italians. Case voit, said Poirot with a smile. Well, it may be that you are right, but I will isent out to you, my friend, that there is absolutely no evidence against the man. And what about the psychology? Do not Italians stab? Assuredly, said Poirot. Especially in the heat of a quarrel, but this is a different kind of crime. I the little idea, my friend, that this is a crime very carefully planned and staged. It is a far-sighted, long-headed crime. It is not, how shall I express it, a Latin crime. It is a crime that shows traces of a resourceful, deliberate brain. I think an Anglo-Saxon brain too. He picked up the last 2 passports. Let us now, he said, see Miss Mary Debenham _11. The evidence of Miss Debenham. When Mary Debenham entered the dining car, she confirmed Poirot's previous estimate of her. She was very neatly dressed in a little black suit with a French grey chine, and the waves of her dark head were neat and unruffled. Her manner was as calm and unruffled as her hair. She sat down opposite Poirot and M. Book and looked at them inquiringly. Your name is Mary Hermione Debenham and you are 26 years of age, began Poirot Yes. English. Yes. Will you be so kind, mademoiselle, as to write down your permanent address on this piece of paper? She complied. Her writing was clear and legible. And now, mademoiselle, what have you to tell us of the affair last night? I am afraid I have nothing to tell you. I went to bed and slept. It distress you very much, mademoiselle, that a crime has been committed on this train. The question was clearly unexpected. Her grey eyes widened a little. I don't quite understand you. It was a perfectly simple question that I asked you, mademoiselle. I will reread it. Are you very much distressed that a crime should have been committed on this train? I have not really thought about it from that point of view. No, I cannot say that I am at all distressed. A crime, it is all in the day's work to you, It is naturally an unpleasant thing to have happen, said Mary Debenham quietly. You are very Anglo-Saxon, mademoiselle. Vous n'éprouvez pas d'émotion. She smiled a little. I am afraid I cannot have hysterics to prove my sensibility. After all, people die every day. They die, yes. But murder is a little more rare. Oh. Certainly. You were not acquainted with the dead man. I saw him for the first time when lunching here yesterday. And how did he strike you? Elle hardly noticed him. He did not impress you as an evil personality. She shrugged her shoulders slightly. Really, I cannot say I thought about it. Poirot looked at her keenly. You are, I think, a little bit contemptuous of the way I prosecute my inquiries, he said with a twinkle. Not so, you think, would an English inquiry be conducted? There everything would cut and dried. It would all kept to the facts, a well-ordered business. But I, mademoiselle, my little originalities. I look first at my witness, I sum up his or her character, and I frame my questions accordingly. Just a little minute ago I am asking questions of a gentleman who wants to tell me all his ideas on every subject. Well, him I keep strictly to the point. I want him to answer yes or no. This or that. And then you come. I see at once that you will be orderly and methodical. You will confine yourself to the matter in hand. Your answers will be brief and to the point. And mademoiselle, human nature is perverse, I ask of you quite different questions. I ask what you feel, what you think. It does not please you, this, if you will forgive my saying so, it seems somewhat of a waste of time. Whether or not I liked Mr. Ratchet's face does not seem likely to be helpful in finding out who killed him. Do you know who the man Ratchet really was, mademoiselle? She nodded. Mrs. Hubbard has been telling everyone. And what do you think of the Armstrong affair? It was quite abominable, said the girl crisply. Poirot looked at her thoughtfully. You are traveling from Baghdad, I miss, to London. What have you been doing in Baghdad? I have been acting as governess to 2 children. Are you returning to your post on your holiday? I am not sure. Why is that? Baghdad is rather out of things. I think I should prefer a post in London if I can hear of a suitable one. I see. I thought, perhaps, you might be going to be married. Miss Debenham did not reply. She raised her eyes and looked Poirot full in the face. The glance said plainly, you are impertinent. What is your opinion of the lady who shares your compartment, Miss Olsen? She seems a pleasant, simple creature. What color is her dressing gown? Mary Debenham stared. A kind of brownish color, natural wool. Ah! I may mention without indiscretion, that I noticed the color of your dressing gown on the way from Aleppo to Stamboul, a pale mame, I believe. Yes, that is right. Have you any other dressing gown, mademoiselle? A scarlet dressing gown, for example? No, that is not mine. Poirot leaned forward. He was like a cat pouncing on a mouse. Whose, then? The girl drew back a little, startled. Don't know. What do you mean? You do not say, no, I have no such thing. You say, that is not mine. Meaning that such a thing belonged to someone else. She nodded. Somebody else on this train? Yes. Whose is it? I told you just now, I don't know. I woke up this morning about 5 o'clock with the feeling that the train had been standing still for a long time. I opened the door and out into the corridor, thinking we might be at a station. I saw someone in a scarlet kimono some way down the corridor. And you don't know who it was? Was she fair, or dark, or gray-haired? I can't say. She had on a shingle cap and I only saw the back of her head. And in build? Tallish and slim, I should judge, but it's difficult to say. The kimono was embroidered with dragons. Yes, yes, that is right, dragons. He was silent a minute. He murmured to himself. I cannot understand. I cannot understand. None of these makes sense. Then, looking up, he said, I need not keep you or the, mademoiselle. Oh. She seemed rather taken aback but rose promptly. In the doorway, however, she hesitated a minute and then came back. The Swedish lady, Miss Olsen, is it? Seems rather warned. She says you told her she was the last person to see this man alias she thinks, that you suspect her on that account. Can't I tell her that she has made a mistake? Really, you know, she is the kind of creature who wouldn't hurt a fly. She smiled a little as she spoke. What time was it that she went to fetch the aspirin from Mrs. Hubbard? Just after 10:30. She was away how long? About 5 minutes. Did she leave the compartment again during the night? Poirot turned to the doctor. Could Ratchet have been killed as early as that? The D.L. Reuter shook his head. Then I think you can reassure your friend, mademoiselle. Thank you. She smiled suddenly at him, a smile that invited sympathy. She's like a sheep, you know. She gets anxious and bleats. She tummed and went out. 12. The evidence of the German lady's maid book. I was looking at his friend curiously. I do not quite understand you, mon vieux. You were trying to do what? I was searching for a flaw, my friend. A flaw? Yes, in the armor of a young lady's self-possession. I wished to shake her sang-froid. Did I succeed? I do not know. But I know this, she did not expect me to tackle the matter as I did. You suspect her, said M'Bow slowly. But why? She seems a very charming young lady, the last person in the world to be mixed up in a crime of this kind. I agree, said Constantine. She is cold. She has not emotions. She would not stab a man, she would sue him in the law courts. Poirot sighed. You must, both of you, get rid of your obsession that this is an unpremeditated and sudden crime. As for the reasons why I miss Debenham, there are two. One is because of something that I overheard, and that you do not as yet know. He retailed to them the curious interchange of phrases he had overheard on the journey from Aleppo. That is curious, certainly, said M'Book when he had finished. It needs explaining. If it means what you suspect it means, then they are of them in it together, she and the stiff English-ish Ma'am. Poirot nodded. And that is just what is not borne out by the facts, too, he said. See you, if they were both in this together, what should we expect to find? That each of them would provide an alibi for the other. Is not that so? But no, that not happen. Miss Debenham's alibi is provided by a Swedish woman whom she has never seen before, and Colonel Arbuthnot's alibi is vouched for by McQueen the dead man's secretary. No, that solution of the puzzle is too easy. You said there was another reason for your suspicions of her, M'Book, reminded him. Poirot smiled. But that is only psychological. I ask myself, is it possible for Miss Debenham to have planned this crime? Behind this business, I am convinced, there is an intelligent, resourceful brain. Miss Debenham answers to that description. M'Book shook his head. I think you are wrong, my friend. I do not see that young English girl as a criminal. Well, said Poirot, picking up the last passport. To the final name on our list, Hildegard Schmidt, Lady S. maid summoned by the attendant. Hildegard Schmidt came into the restaurant car and stood waiting respectfully. Poirot motioned her to sit down. She did so, folding her hands and waiting placidly till he questioned her. She seemed a placid creature, altogether eminently respectable, perhaps not over-intelligent. Poirot's with Hildegard Schmidt were a complete contrast to his handling of Mary de Debenham. He was at his kindest and most genial, setting the woman at her ease. Then, having got her to type down her name and address, he slid gently into his questions. The interview took place in German. We want to know as much as about what happened last night, too, he said. We know that you cannot give us much information bearing on the crime itself, but you may have seen or heard something that, while conveying nothing to you, may be valuable to us. You understand? She did not seem to. Her broad, kindly face remained set in its expression of placid stupidity as she answered, I do not know anything, monsieur. Well, for instance, you know that your mistress sent for you last night. That, yes. Do you remember the time? I do not, monsieur. I was asleep, you see, when the attendant came and told me. Yes, yes. Was it usual for you to be sent for in this way? It was not unusual, monsieur. The gracious lady often required attention at night. She did not sleep well. Beans, then, you received the summons and you got up. Did you put on a dressing gown? No, monsieur, I put on a few clothes. I would not like to go into Her Excellency in my dressing gown. And yet it is a very nice dressing gown, scarlet, is it not? She stared at him. It is a dark blue flannel dressing gown, monsieur. Ah. Continue. A little pleasantry on my part, that is all. So you went along to Madame la Princesse and what did you do when you got there? I gave her massage, monsieur, and then I read aloud. I do not read aloud very well, but Her Excellency says that is all the better, so it sends her better to sleep. When she became sleepy, monsieur, she told me to go, so I closed the book and I returned to my own compartment. Do you know what time that was? No, monsieur. Well, how long had you been with Madame la Princesse? About half an hour, monsieur continue. First, I fetched Her Excellency an extra mg from my compartment. It was very cold in spite of the heating. I arranged the rug over her, and she wished me good night. I poured her out some mineral water. Then I turned out the light and left her. And then? There is nothing more, monsieur. I returned to my carriage and went to sleep. And you met no one in the corridor? No, monsieur. You did not, for instance, see a lady in a scarlet kimono, dragons on it? Her mild eyes bulged at him. No, indeed, monsieur. There was about except the attendant. Everyone was asleep, but you did see the conductor? Yes, monsieur. What was he doing? He came out of one of the compartments, monsieur. What? Book leaned Fonvard. 1. Hildegard Schmidt looked frightened again, and Poirot cast a reproachful glance at his friend. Naturally, he said, the conductor often has to answer bells at night. Do you remember which compartment it was? It was about the middle of the coach, monsieur. 2 or 3 from Madame la Princesse. I'll tell us, if you please, exactly where this was and Ivy had happened. He nearly ran into me, monsieur. It was when I was returning from my compartment to that of the princess with the rug, and he came out of a compartment and almost collided with you. In which direction was he going? Towards me, monsieur. He apologized and passed on down the corridor towards the dining car. A bell began ringing, but I do not think he answered it. She paused and then said, I do not understand. How is it? Poirot spoke reassuringly. It is just a question of time, he said. All a matter of routine. This poor conductor, he seems to HME had a busy night, first waking you and then answering bells. It was not the same conductor who woke me, Mensler_. It was another one. Ah. Another one. Had you seen him before? No, monsieur. You think you would recognize him if I saw him? I think so, monsieur. Poirot mumbled something in Book's ear. The latter got up and went to give an order. Poirot was continuing his questions in an easy, friendly manner. Have you ever been to America, Fraulein Schmidt? Never, monsieur. It must be a fine country. You have heard, perhaps, who this man who was killed really was, that he was responsible for the death of a little child? Yes, I have heard, monsieur. It was the good God should not allow such things. We are not so wicked as that in Germany. Tears had come into the woman's eyes. Her strong, motherly soul was moved. It was an abominable crime, said Poirot gravely. He drew a scrap of cambric from his pocket and handed it to her. Is this your handkerchief, Fraulein Schmidt? There was a moment's silence as the woman examined it. She looked up after a minute. The color had mounted a little in her face. No, indeed. It is not mine, monsieur. It has the initial H, you see. That is why I thought it was yours. Ah, monsieur, it is a lady's handkerchief, that. A very expensive handkerchief embroidered by hand. It comes from Paris, I should say. It is not yours and you do not know whose it is. Oh. No, monsieur. Of the three listening, only Poirot caught the nuance of hesitation in the reply. 84 Book whispered in his ear. Poirot nodded and said to the woman, the 3 sleeping car attendants are coming in. Will you be so kind as to tell me which is the one you met last night as you were going with the rug to the princess? The 3 men entered. Pierre Michel, the big blonde conductor of the Athens-Paris coach, and the stout burly conductor of the Bucharest one. Hildegard Schmidt looked at them and immediately her head. No, monsieur, she said. None of these is the man I saw last night. But these are the only conductors on the train. You must be mistaken. I am quite sure, monsieur. These are all tall, big men. The one I saw was small and dark, he had a little mustache. His voice when he said pardon was weak like a woman's. Indeed, I remember him very well, Monsieur. 8513 Summary of the passengers' evidence. A small dark man with a womanish said book _ the 3 conductors and Hildegard Schmidt had been dismissed. Book made a despairing gesture. But I understand nothing but nothing, of all of this. The enemy that this rat Chet spoke of, he was then on the train after all. But where is he now? How can he have vanished into thin air? My head, it whirls. Say something, then, my friend, I implore you. Show me how the impossible can be possible. It is a good phrase that, said Poirot. The impossible cannot have happened, therefore the impossible must be possible in spite of appearances. Explain to me, then, quickly, what actually happened on the train last night. I am not a magician, mon cher. I am, like you, a very puzzled man. This affair advances in a very strange manner. It does not advance at all. It stays where it was. Poirot shook his head. No, that is not true. We are more advanced. We know certain things. We have heard the evidence of the passengers. And what has that told us? Nothing at all. L.N. would not say that, my friend. I exaggerate, perhaps. The American hardman, and the German maid, yes, they added something to our knowledge, that is to say, they have made the whole business more unintelligible than it was. No, 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 said Poirot soothingly. Book tummed upon him. Speak, then, let us hear the wisdom of Hercule Poirot. Did I not tell you that I was, like you, a very puzzled man? But at least we can face our problem. We can arrange such facts as we have with order and method. Pray continue, monsieur, said Dr. Constantine. Poirot cleared his throat and straightened a piece of blotting paper. Let us review the case as it stands at this moment. First, there are certain indisputable facts. This man, Ratchet, or Cassetti, was stabbed in 12 places and died last night. That is fact. I'll grant it you, I grant it, mon vieux Colin, said Book with a gesture of irony. Hercule Poirot I was not at all put out. He continued calmly. L will pass over for the moment certain rather peculiar appearances which Dr. Constantine and I have already discussed together. I will come to them presently. The next fact of importance, to my mind, is the time of the crime. That, again, is one of the few things we do know, said Book _ the crime was committed at 1:15 this morning _ everything goes to show that that was so. Not everything. You exaggerate. There is, certainly, a fair amount of evidence to support that. I am glad you admit that at least. Poirot went on calmly, unperturbed by the interruption. We have 3 possibilities. 86. L. That the crime was committed, as you say, at 1:15. This is supported by the evidence of the watch, by the evidence of Mrs. Hubbard, and by the evidence of the German woman, Hildegard Schmidt. It agrees with the evidence of Dr. Constantine. 2. That the crime was committed later, and that the evidence of the watch was deliberately faked in order to mislead. The crime was committed earlier, and the evidence faked for the same reason as above. Now if we accept possibility 1 as the most likely to have occurred, and the one supported by most evidence, we must also accept certain facts arising from it. If the crime was committed at 1:15, the murderer cannot left the train, and the questions arise, where is he? And who is he? To begin with, let us examine the evidence carefully. We first hear of the existence of this man, the small dark man with a womanish voice, from the man Hardman. He says that Ratchet told him of this person and employed him to watch out for the man. There is no evidence to support this, we have only Hardman's word for it. Let us next examine the question: is Hardman the person? He pretends to be an operative of a New York detective agency. What to my mind is so interesting in this case is that we have none of the facilities afforded to the police. We cannot investigate the bona fides of any of these people. We have to rely solely on deduction. That, to me, makes the matter very much more interesting. There is no routine work. It is all a matter of the intellect. I ask myself, can we accept Hardman's account of himself? I make my decision and I answer yes. I am of the opinion that we can accept Hardman's account of himself. You rely on the intuition? Had the Americans call the hunch too? Asked Dr. Constantine. Not at all. I regard the probabilities. Hardman is traveling with a false passport that will at once make him an object of suspicion. The first thing that they will do when they do arrive upon the scene is to detain Hardman and cable as to whether his account of himself is TME. In the case of many of the passengers, to establish their bona fides will be difficult. In most cases it will probably not be attempted, especially since there seems nothing in the way of suspicion attaching to them. But in Hardman's case it is simple. Either he is the person he represents himself to or he is not. Therefore I say that all will prove to in order. You acquit him of suspicion. Not at all. You misunderstand me. For all I know, any American detective might have his own private reasons for wishing to murder Ratchet. No, what I am saying is that I think we can accept Hardman's own account of himself. This story, then, that he tells of Ratchet seeking him out and employing him is not unlikely, and is most probably, though not of course certainly, true. If we are going to accept it as true, we must see if there is any confirmation of it. We find it in rather an unlikely place in the evidence of Hildegard Schmidt. Her description of the man she saw in wagon-lit uniform tallies exactly. Is there any farther confirmation of these two stories? There is. There is the button that Mrs. Hubbard found in her compartment, and there is also another corroborating statement which you may not have noticed. What is that? The fact that Colonel Arbuthnot and Hector McQueen mentioned that the conductor passed their carriage. They attached no to the fact, but, Messieurs, Pierre Michel has declared that he did not leave his seat except on certain specified occasions, none of which would take him down to the far end of the coach past the compartment in which Arbuthnot and McQueen were sitting. Therefore this story, the story of a small dark man with a womanish dressed in wagon-lit uniform, rests on the testimony, direct or indirect, of 4 witnesses. One small point, said Dr. Constantine. If Hildegard Schmidt's story is true, how is it that the real conductor did not mention having seen her when he came to answer Mrs. Hubbard's? That is explained, I think. 4/hen he arrived to answer Hubbard, the maid was in with her mistress. Hen she finally returned to her compartment, the conductor was in with Mrs. Hubbard. Book had been waiting with difficulty until they had finished. Yes, my friend, he said impatiently to Poirot. But whilst I admire your caution, your of advancing a step at a time, I submit that you have not yet touched the point at issue. We are all agreed that this person exists. The point is, where did he go? Poirot shook his head reprovingly. You are in error. You are inclined to put the cart before the horse. Before I ask myself, where did this man vanish to? I ask myself, did such a man really exist? Because, you see, if the man were in fabrication, how much easier to make him disappear. So I try to establish first that there really is such a flesh and blood person. And having arrived at the fact that there is a beans, where is he now? There are only two answers to that, mon cher. Either he is still hidden on the train in a place of such extraordinary ingenuity that we cannot even think of it, or else he is, as one might say, two persons. That is, he is both himself the man feared by M. Ratchet and a passenger on the train so well disguised that M. Ratchet did not recognize him. It is a tl idea, that, said M. Book, his face lighting up. Then it clouded over again. But there is one objection. Poirot took the words out of his mouth. The height of the man it is that you would say? With the exception of Mr. Ratchet's valet, all the passengers are big men. The Italian, Colonel Arbuthnot, Hector McQueen, Count Andrini. Well, that leaves us the valet. Not a very likely supposition. But there is another possibility. Remember the woman's W voice. That gives us a choice of alternatives. The man may be disguised as a woman, or, alternatively, he may actually be a woman. A tall woman dressed in men's clothes would look small. But surely Ratchet would have known, perhaps he did know, perhaps, already, this woman had attempted his life, wearing Amare's clothes the better to accomplish her purpose. Ratchet may have guessed that she would use the same trick again, so he tells Hardman to look for a man. But he mentions, however, a womanish valse. It is a isisability, said M. Book. But listen, my friend, I think that I should now tell you of certain inconsistencies noticed by Dr. C. Onstant me. He retailed at length the conclusions that he and the had arrived at together from the nature of the dead man's ounce. M. Book groaned and held his head again. I know, said Poirot sympathetically. I know exactly how you feel. The head spins, DLRS it not. The whole thing is a fantasy, cried M. Book. Exactly. It is absurd, improbable, it cannot be. So I myself have said, and yet, my friend, there it is. One cannot escape from the facts. It is madness. Is it not? It is so mad, my friend, that sometimes I am haunted by the sensation that really it must be very simple, but that is only one of my little ideas. Two murderers, groaned M. Book. And on the Orient Express the thought almost made him weep. And now let us make the fantasy more fantastic, said Poirot cheerfully. Last night on the train, there are two mysterious strangers. There is the wagon-lit attendant answering to the description given us by M. Hardman, and seen by Hildegard Schmidt, Colonel Arbuthnot and M. McQueen. There is also a woman in a red kimono, a tall slim woman, seen by Pierre Michel, Miss M. McQueen and myself, and smelled, I may say, by Colonel Arbuthnot. Who was she? No one on the train admits to having a scarlet kimono. She, too, has vanished. Was she one and the same with the spurious wagon-lit attendant? Or was she some quite distinct personality? Where are they, these two? And incidentally, where are the wagon-lit uniform and the scarlet kimono? Ah! That is something definite. M. Book sprang up eagerly. We must search all the passengers, luggage. Yes, that will be something. Poirot rose also. L will make a prophecy, he said. You know where they are. I have a little idea. Where, then? You will find the scarlet kimono in the baggage of one of the men, and you will find the uniform of the wagon-lit conductor in the baggage of Hildegard Schmidt. Hildegard Schmidt? You think not what you are thinking. I will put it like this. If Hildegard Schmidt is guilty, the uniform may be found in her baggage. But if she is innocent, it certainly I will be. But ho dash began book and stoppered underscore hat is this noise that approaches, he cried. It resembles a locomotive in motion. The noise drew nearer. It consisted of shrill cries and protests in a ominous voice. At the end of the dining car burst open. Mrs. Hubbard burst. It's too horrible, she cried. It's just horrible. In my SRXMGE bag underscore my sponge bag. A great knife all over and suddenly toppling forward, she fainted heavily on Book's shoulder. 14 The evidence of the weapon with more vigor than chivalry, a book deposited the fainting lady with her head on the table. Dr. Constantine yelled for one off restaurant attendants, who came at a rum. Keep her head, so said the doctor. If she revives, give her a little cognac. You understand. Then he hurried off after the other two. His interest lay wholly in the crime. Swooning middle-aged ladies did not interest him at all. It is possible that Mrs. Hubbard revived rather more quickly by these methods than she might otherwise have done. A few minutes later she was sitting up, sipping cognac from a glass proffered by the attendant, and talking once more. I just can't tell you how terrible it was. I don't suppose anybody on this train can understand my feelings. I've always been very, very sensitive ever since I was a child. The mere sight of blood, ugh. Why, even now I get faint when I think about it. The attendant proffered the glass. Agle encore un peu, madam. One you think I'd better? I'm a lifelong teetotaler. I never touch spirits or wine at any time. All my family are abstainers. Still, a raps as this is only medicinal. She once more. In the meantime Poirot and Book, closely followed by Dr. Constantine, had hurried out of the restaurant car and along the corridor of the Stamboul coach towards Mrs. Hubbard's compartment. Every traveler on the train seemed to be congregated outside the door. The conductor, a harassed look on his face, was keeping them back. Mais ilny rien voir, he said, and repeated the sentiment in several other languages. Let me pass if you please, said Book underscore squeezing his rotundity past the obstructing passengers. He entered the compartment, Poirot close behind him. I am glad you have come, monsieur, said the conductor with a sigh of relief. Everyone has trying to enter. The American lady, such screams as she gave, ma foi, I thought she had been murdered. I came at a nun, and there she was screaming like a mad woman, and she cried out that she must fetch you, and she departed screeching at the top of her voice and telling everybody whose carriage she passed what had occulted underscore. He added, a gesture of the hand, it is in there, monsieur. I have not touched it. Hanging on the handle of the door that gave access to the next compartment was a large checked rubber sponge bag. Below it on the floor, just where it had fallen from Nirs underscore Hubbard's hand, was a straight blade dagger, a cheap affair, sham oriental with an hilt and a tapering blade. The blade was stained with patches of what looked like rust. Poirot picked it up delicately underscore. Yes, he murmured. There is no mistake. Here is our missing weapon, all right. The DL Reuter examined it. You need not be so careful, said Poirot. There will be no fingerprints on it save those of Mrs. Hubbard. Constantine's examination did not take long. 90. It is the weapon, all right, he said. It would account for any of the wounds. I implore you, my friend, do not say that. The Deuter looked astonished. Already we are heavily overburdened by coincidence. 2 people decided to stab Ratchet last night. It is much of a good thing that both of them should select the same weapon underscore. As to that, the coincidence is not perhaps so great as it seems, said the Deuter underscore. Thousands of these chamois stem daggers are made and shipped to the bazaars of Constantinople. You console me a little, but only a little, said Poirot. He looked thoughtfully at the door in front of him, then, Lifting off the sponge bag, he tried the handle. The door did not budge. About a foot above the handle was the door. Poirot drew it back and tried again, but still the door remained fast. "We it from the other side, you remember," said the doctor. "That is time," said Poirot absently. He seemed to thinking about something else, his brow was furrowed as though in perplexity. "It agrees, does it not?" said M. The man passes through this carriage. As he shuts the communicating door behind him, he feels the sponge bag. A thought comes to him and he quickly slips the blood-stained knife inside. Then, all unwitting that he has awakened Mrs. Hubbard, he slips out through the other door into the corridor. "As you say," murmured Poirot, "that is how it must have happened." But the puzzle did not leave his face. "But what is it?" demanded M. "There is something, is there not, that does not satisfy you?" Poirot deigned a quick look at him. "The same point not strike you?" "No, evidently not. Well, it is a small matter." The conductor looked into the carnage. "The American lady is coming back." Dr. Constantine rather guilty. He had, he felt, treated Mrs. Hubbard rather cavalierly, but she had no reproaches for him. Her energies were concentrated on another matter. "I'm going to say one thing right out," she said breathlessly as she arrived in the doorway. "I'm not going on any longer in this compartment. Why, I wouldn't sleep in it tonight if you paid me $1,000,000. But, Madame, I'll know what you are going to say, and I'm telling you right now that I won't do any such thing. Why, I'd rather sit up all night in the corridor." She began to cry. "Oh, if my daughter could only knew, if she could see me now." "Why," Poirot interrupted firmly. "You misunderstand, madam. Your demand is most reasonable. Your baggage shall change at once to another compartment." Mrs. Hubbard lowered her handkerchief. "Is that so? Oh. I feel better right away. But surely it's all frill, unless one of the gentlemen spoke. Your baggage, madam, shall be moved out of this coach altogether. You shall a compartment in the next coach, which was put on at Belgrade." "Why, that's splendid. I'm not an extra nervous woman, but to sleep in that compartment next to a dead man." She shivered. "It would drive me plumb crazy." Michel called M. "Move this baggage into a vacant compartment in the Athens Paris." "Yes, monsieur. The same one as this, the No. 3. "No," said Poirot before his friend could reply. "I think it would be better for madame to have a different number altogether. The number 12, for instance." "Bien, monsieur." The conductor seized the luggage. Mrs. Hubbard tummed gratefully to Poirot. "That's very kind and delicate of you. I appreciate it, I assure you." "Do not mention it, madam. We will come with you and see you comfortably installed." Mrs. Hubbard was escoffied by the three men to her new home. She looked round her happily. "This is fine. It suits you, madam. It is, you see, exactly like the compartment you have left." "That's so, only it faces the other way." "But that doesn't matter, for these trains go first one way and then the other. I said to my daughter, I want a carriage facing the engine, and she said, why, Mama, that'll be no good to you, for if you go to sleep one way, when you wake up, the train's going the other." And it was quite TME what she said. "Last evening we went into Belgrade one way and out the other." "At any rate, madam, you are quite happy and contented now." "Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Here we are stuck in a snowdrift and nobody doing anything about it, and my sailing the day after tomorrow." "Madam," said M. "we are all in the same case, every one of us." "Well, that's true," admitted Mrs. Hubbard. "But nobody else has had a murderer walking right through her compartment in the middle of night. What still puzzles me, Madam, said Poirot, is how the man got into your compartment if the communicating was bolted as you say. You are sure that it was bolted? Why, the Swedish lady tried it. My eyes underscore. Let us just reconstruct that little scene. You were lying in your bunk so and you could not see for yourself, you say. No, because of the sponge bag. Oh. My, I shall ha to get a new sponge bag. It makes me feel sick at my stomach too at this one. Poirot picked up the sponge bag and hung it on the handle of the communicating into the next carriage underscore precisement underscore I see, he said. The bolt is just underneath the handle. The sponge bag masks it. You could not see from where you were lying whether the bolt was tummed or not. Why, that's just what I been telling you. And the Swedish lady, Miss Olsen, stood so, between you and she tried it and told you it was bolted. That's so. All the same, madam, she may have made an error underscore. You see what I mean? Poirot seemed anxious to explain. The bolt is just a projection of metal, so when it is turned to the right, the is ilked. When it is left straight, the door is unlocked. Possibly she merely tried the door, and as it was locked on the other side she may have assumed that it was locked on your side. Well, I guess that would be rather stupid of her. Madam, the most kind, the most amiable, are not always the cleverest. That's so, of course. By the way, madam, did you out to Smyrna this way? No, I sailed right to Stamboul, and a friend of my daughter, Mr. Johnson, a perfectly lovely man, I'd like to have you know him, met me and showed me all round Stamboul underscore. But it was a very disappointing city, all tumbling down, and as for those mosques, and putting on those great shuffling things over your was I. You were saying that Mr. Johnson met you. That's so, and he saw me on board a French message rise for Smyrna, and my daughter's husband Ivis waiting right on the quay. You had he'll say when he hears about all this. My daughter said this would be just the safest, easiest way imaginable. You just sit in your carriage, she said, and you land right in Parmes, and there the American Express will meet you. And, oh, dear, what am I to do about canceling my steamship passage? I ought to let them know. I can't possibly make it now. This is just too terrible. Mrs. Hubbard showed signs of tears once more. Poirot, who had fidgeting slightly, seized his opportunity underscore. You have had a shock, madam. The restaurant attendant shall instructed to bring you along some tea and some biscuits underscore. Don't know that I'm so set on tea, said Nirs underscore Hubbard tearfully. That's more an English habit underscore z coffee, then, madam. You need some stimulant. That cognac made my head feel mighty amny underscore. I think I would like some coffee. Excellent. You must revive your forces. My, what a funny expression. But first, madam, a little matter of routine. You permit that I make a search of your baggage. What for? We are about to commence a search of all the passengers' luggage. I do not want to remind you of an unpleasant experience, but your sponge bag, remember, mercy. Perhaps you, better. I just couldn't bear to get any more surprises of that kind. The examination was quickly over underscore. Mrs. Hubbard was traveling with the minimum of luggage: a hat box, a cheap suitcase, and a well-burdened traveling bag. The contents of all three were simple and straightforward, and the examination would not taken more than a couple of minutes had not Mrs. Hubbard delayed matters by insisting on due attention being paid to photographs of my daughter and of two rather ugly children, my daughter's children. Aren't they cunning? 9315. The evidence of the passenger's luggage having delivered himself of various I-11 one-eyed insincerities, and having told Nirs underscore Hubbard that he would order coffee to be brought to her, Poirot was able to take his leave accompanied by his two friends. Well, we have made a stand and drawn, a blank observed M. Whom shall we attack next? It would be simplest, I think, just to proceed along the train, carriage by carriage. That means that we start with No. 16. The amiable Mr. Mr. Hardman, who was smoking a cigar, welcomed them affably come right ins gentlemen. That is, if it's humanly possible. It's just a mite cram road in here for a party 2. M. explained the object of their visit, and the big detective nodded comprehendingly that's okay. To tell the TNLTH, I've been wondering you didn't get down to it. Here are my keys, gentlemen, and if you like to search my pockets, why, you're welcome. Shall I reach the grips down for you? The conductor will do that, Michel. The contents of Mr. Hardman's 2 grips were soon examined and passed. They contained, perhaps, an undue proportion of spirit-use liquor. Mr. Hardman winked. It's not often they search your grips at the frontiers, not if you fix the conductor. I handed out a wad of Turkish notes right away, and there's been no trouble so far. And at Paris? Mr. Hardman winked again. By the time I get to Pans, he said, what's left over of this little lot will go into a bottle labeled hair wash. You are not in Prohibition, Monsieur Hardman, said M. with a smile. Well, said Hardman, I can't say Prohibition has ever worried me any. Ah, said M. The speakeasy. He pronounced the word with care, savoring it. Your American terms are so quaint, so expressive, he said. Me, I would much like to go to America, said Poirot. You'd learn a few. Go ahead over there, said Hardman. Europe needs waking up. She's half asleep. It is true that America is the country of progress, agreed Poirot. There is much that I admire about Americans. Only I am perhaps old-fashioned, but I find the American women less charming than my countrywomen. The French or the Belgian girl, coquettish, charming. I think there is no one to touch her. Hardman turned away to peer out at the snow for a minute. Perhaps you're right, M. Poirot, he said. But I guess every nation likes its own girls best. He blinked as though the snow hurt his eyes. Kind of dazzling, isn't it? He remarked. Say, gentlemen, this business is getting on my nerves. Murder and the snow and all. And nothing doing. Just hanging about and killing time. I'd like to get busy after someone or something. The true Western spirit of hustle, said Poirot with a smile. 94. The conductor replaced the bags and they moved on to the next compartment. Colonel Arbuthnot was sitting in a comber smoking a pipe and reading a magazine. Poirot explained their errand. The colonel made no demur. He had 2 heavy leather suitcases. The rest of my kit has gone by long sea, he explained. Like most army men, the colonel was a neat packer. The examination of his baggage only a few minutes. Poirot noted a packet of pipe cleaners. You always use the same kind, he asked. Usually. If I can get M. Ah. Poirot nodded. These pipe cleaners corresponded exactly with the one he had found on the floor of the dead man's compartment. Dr. Constantine remarked as much when they were out in the corridor again. Tout de même, murmured Poirot, I can hardly believe it. It is not dans son caractère, and when you have said that, you have said everything. The door of the next compartment was closed. It was that Cupid by Princess Dragomirov. They knocked on the door and the princess's deep voice called Entrées. M. was spokesman. He was very deferential and polite as he explained their errand. The princess listened to him in silence, her small toad-like face quite impassive. If it is necessary, messieurs, she said quietly when he had finished, that is all there is to it. My maid has the keys. She will attend to it with you. Your maid always carry your keys, madame, asked Poirot. Certainly, monsieur. And if, during the night at one of the frontiers, the customs officials should require a piece of luggage to be opened. The old lady shrugged her shoulders. It is very unlikely. But in such a case, the conductor would fetch her. Utmst her, then, implicitly, madam. I have told you so already, said the princess quietly. I do not employ people whom I do not. Yes, said Poirot thoughtfully. Trust is indeed something in these days. It is perhaps better to have a homely woman whom one can trust than a more chic maid, for example, some smart parasol. He saw the dark intelligent eyes come slowly round and fasten themselves upon his face. What exactly are you implying, M. Poirot? Nothing, madam. Nothing. But yes. You think, do you not, that I should have a smart French woman to attend to my toilet? It would be perhaps more usual, madam. She shook her head. Schmidt is devoted to me. Her voice dwelt lingeringly on the words. Devotion est impayable. The German woman had arrived with the keys. The princess spoke to her in her own language, telling her to open the valises and help the gentlemen in their search. She herself remained in the coffeter looking out at the snow, and Poirot remained with her, leaving Bouc to the task of searching the luggage. She regarded him a grim smile. Well, monsieur, do you not wish to see what my valises contain? He shook his head. Madam, it is a formality, that is all. Are you so sure? In your case, yes, and yet I knew and loved Sonia Armstrong. What do you think then? That I would not soil my hands with killing such canaille as that man Cassetti? Well, perhaps you are right. She was silent a minute or two. Then she said, with such a man as that, do you know what I should have liked to do? I should have liked to call to my aunts, flog this man to death and fling him out on the bish heap. That is the way things were done when I was young, monsieur. Still he did not speak, just listened attentively. She at him with a sudden impetuosity. You do not say anything, M. Poirot. What is it that you are thinking, I wonder? He looked at her with a very direct glance. I think, madam, that your strength is in your eyeball, not in your arm. She glanced down at her thin, black-clad arms ending in those claw-like yellow hands with the rings on the fingers. It is true, she said. I have no strength in these, none. I do not know whether I am sorry or glad. Then she turned abruptly back towards her carriage where the maid was busily packing up the cases. The princess cut Jean Bouc's apologies. There is no need for you to, monsieur, she said. A murder has been committed, certain actions to perform, that is all there is to it. Vous êtes bien aimable, madame. She inclined her head slightly as they departed. The doors of the next two carriages were shut. Bouc paused and scratched his head. Diable, he said. This may be awkward. These are diplomatic passports. Their luggage is exempt from customs examination. Yes, but a murder is different, I know. All the same, we do not want to have complications. Do not distress yourself, my friend. The Count and Countess will be reasonable. See how amiable Princess Dragomirov was about it. She is truly grande dame. These two are also of the same position, but the Count impressed me as a man of somewhat truculent disposition. He was not pleased when you insisted on questioning his wife. And this will annoy him still further. Suppose we omit them. After all, they can have nothing to do with the matter. Why should I stir up needless trouble for myself? I do not agree with you, said Poirot. I feel sure that Count Andrini will reasonable. At any rate, let us make the attempt. And before Bouc could reply, he rapped sharply on the door of number 13. A voice from within cried, Entrez. The Count was sitting in the comber near the door reading a newspaper. The Countess was curled up in the opposite corner near the window. There was a pillow behind her head and she seemed to been asleep. Pardon, Monsieur le Comte, began Poirot. Pray forgive this intrusion. It is that we are making a search of all the baggage on the train. In most cases a mere formality. But it has to done. Book suggests that, as you have a diplomatic passport, you might reasonably claim to be exempt from such a search.